are here because the outside world rejects you.
Hey, what's up everyone? In this video, we will be breaking down the events of a big Ninja Turtles story arc that happened recently in the IDW Ninja Turtles comics. The story was called The Armageddon Game. The main title of the story was 8 issues long, but the story bled into the ongoing regular Ninja Turtles comics, and there was also side stories that came out under the title The Armageddon Game The Alliance. So actually in total, the story spanned 21 issues, which I think might be the biggest Ninja Turtles story arc that's ever been told in comics. Now this story tied up a bunch of storylines that had been building up over the years in the Ninja Turtles IDW comics. So at the start of this video here, you'll see a quick prelude part that sets everything up that you'll need to know going into the story. After that crash course, we jump into the breakdown of the actual Armageddon Game arc. Quick disclaimer, when this story was first coming out, they had a checklist of all the issues and in what order they needed to be read. But as it was coming out, some books got delayed, and I'm also pretty sure that the order of the list got changed at one point. I kept this in mind as I was making the video, and I pretty much discussed the events in the order that makes sense to me, and hopefully it makes sense to you. But with that said, let's go ahead and jump on in. So what the pre-game comic was some sequences from past comic issues that have come out over the years involving the Rat King, an enemy of the Turtles, a trickster. He appears to be the central villain of this upcoming Armageddon Game event. For those who don't know, this version of the Rat King comes from the Pantheon, a family of 8 powerful divine ancient beings, siblings, each possessed with diversely unique powers and personalities. The Rat King thrives on chaos. One major thing of note is that throughout Earth's history, he and his family seem to have been playing a supernatural game of conquest, with each one of the siblings making a move every so often, trying to one-up each other, manipulating and controlling the lives of others in order to create events in their favor. It is said that the winner of this game will rule over all, and it appears if Rat King wins this game, he will turn everything into chaos the way he likes it. Now he believes now is the perfect time to strike and renew this ancient game that they've been playing, this time calling it the Armageddon Game. You see, something you should know is that his siblings have all pretty much stopped playing the game after so many years of going back and forth. They see it as zero-sum and pointless, and they're off doing their own thing now, so he really has no competition at the moment. Also, around issue 100 of these comics, a mutagen bomb went off, mutating a large portion of the population in New York, and now the mutated have been walled off and quarantined in a section of the city called Mutant Town, so the city is divided and people are scattered. And also, Splinter died around issue 100 as well, and so the Turtles, who are one of the Rat King's biggest obstacle in all this, have no guide at the moment and are sort of aimless. So the Rat King sees this as an opportunity to win the game once and for all, and so he recruits a team of 3 others to join his cause. First up on the team we have Crain, who was recently eaten alive by Leatherhead. As it turns out, the type of species Crain is, a neutron, are parasitic in this version. So instead of getting digested, Leatherhead has been slowly taken over by Crain, and now Crain sits in Leatherhead's abdomen. Next on the Rat King's team we have Baxter Stockman, who has recently become the mayor of New York and is the one who declared a quarantine zone in the city, which now is known as Mutant Town. And the last member of the team is someone called Madame Null, who is the CEO of the Null Group, a business conglomerate with its hands in many ventures and ties to other dimensions. She has been the antagonist in some past stories, but she's kind of a mystery still, and her exact nature is still ambiguous. Even the Shredder doesn't know what to make of her yet. Now after the pre-game comic came out, there was a couple more comics that lead into the Armageddon Game 8-part event. Those comics are called Armageddon Game Opening Moves Part 1 and Part 2. We learned some more info from these books as well, and also from the regular numbered ongoing Turtles comics. Let's take a look at some of that stuff. Now you see at one point, Rat King tried to recruit Shredder to this evil team. Now for those who have never read these comics or are just jumping in, Shredder was already defeated and killed in this comic, way back around issue 50. And as we mentioned, this comic series has gone past past 100 issues. But you see, around issue 100, he was resurrected by Splinter, who sacrificed himself in the process. You see, the two had come to be friends again, while Shredder was in the afterlife, where Splinter was able to communicate with him somehow, and so the two's friendship had been rekindled. In this version of the Turtles, the two were friends many years ago in Japan before they became enemies. So yeah, because of this, Shredder declines Rat King's proposal to join this team of bad guys and instead warns the Turtles of the impending doom. Also, in the opening Moves comics, we see him spying and collecting info on Krang, Baxter, and Madame Null. Now, when he brings this news to the Turtles have other allies there, and a lot of the group still have a lot of resentment towards the Shredder because of his past actions. And in fact, one friend of the Turtles, Alopex, a mutant fox, ends up leaving the team because of this. But Leonardo seems to believe the Shredder, and so the Shredder begins teaching the Turtles new techniques, mystic techniques as well, to help combat the upcoming actions the Rat King and his allies have planned. Shredder has pretty much become the Turtles' new master, which is pretty crazy. Never thought we'd see that. One interesting part about this training is seeing that Leonardo will have to confront Dark Leonardo, a bad alter ego version of himself that he once became back in the early issues of this series. It was a pretty traumatizing event for him, but Shredder says that that dark alter ego still lies within Leo and that he has to learn how to control it and harness it. So it looks like Leonardo will have some pretty badass moments in this Armageddon game once that happens. I wonder if there'll be a point in the story where he goes full Dark Leonardo mode with the old suit he used to wear and stuff. That would be pretty cool. Now, this story is a big event for the IDW Comics Turtles, so elements from the Armageddon game are definitely gonna have to, and already do, bleed over into the regular numbered comics, the ones that have gone past 100 issues. Now, the same is true the other way around. There's situations currently going on in the numbered comics that are gonna be a part of the Armageddon game from some of the things we have seen. Real quick, here's some of those situations that I think you should know about, that way you know what's going on. Remember Venus from the Next Mutation show? Well, recently the IDW comics have introduced their version of the character, and it's a pretty dark story. She hasn't really done much yet, as when she was introduced, she was literally being put together, Frankenstein style, by some creepy doctor. We know that she has the ability to use some type of mystic powers, and the little bit we've seen on her backstory is pretty interesting. We'll cover it more in a separate video as it unfolds, but expect her to show up at some point in the Armageddon game. They actually had the recent Free Comic Book Day issue of the Ninja Turtles dedicated to these clones, but we don't know much about them yet. By the looks of things, there are 4 of them. They wear white bandanas, and they share the same names as the regular Turtles, but the weapons are all mixed up, with their version of Raphael using a bow, Michelangelo using swords, and so on. Recent covers of new issues of the Turtles and the upcoming Armageddon game have been shown off, and we can see the clones on these covers in full display, so I think it's safe to say these Turtles will be involved as well somehow. So many Turtles. They should do a Turtle Wars arc at some point with all these Turtles around now. Many fans have already learned about the yellow Ninja Turtle, Jennika, that was introduced a while back. But just in case you haven't and end up wondering who is that yellow Ninja Turtle, well, that is Jennika. She was actually a human before, an assassin. She was turned into a turtle due to some blood Leonardo gave her when she was dying. It'll be interesting to see how her story develops in the Armageddon game. One thing that keeps getting teased in photos for the Armageddon game is the Nova Posse. We haven't seen much about them yet in this version of the Turtles, but I do expect them to be a big part of the story from how much they're showing them lately. We do know that they're a throwback to the Nova Posse who appeared in the 80s, 90s Ninja Turtles Archie comics, and in that they were a resistance movement in Dimension X, and the little bit we've seen of them here in this version of the Turtles, they seem to have a similar backstory. They appear to be very capable fighters and also coming from Dimension X. So this next character is active in the regular Turtles comics at the moment. So other than Krang, there is another evil Utrom currently involved in this version of the Turtles, and that's Chirel. Yes, the same name as another evil Utrom in a different version of the Turtles that some of you may remember. But yes, both he and Krang exist in this Turtles universe and have worked together in the past. Anyways, not to get too much into the details, which would require its own video, he's currently at a nearby island causing mayhem, and recently a Triceraton just escaped that island, and it looks like those events could overflow onto the Turtles. So if you haven't been reading the comics and all of a sudden you see this other evil Utrom, now you won't get him mixed up with Krang, who, if you remember, is currently attached to Leatherhead, as we discussed earlier. And finally, real quick, Karai is currently leading the Foot Clan, and Shredder does not appear to want to be any part of that. He seems content with his new life. We'll have to see just exactly how Karai fits in all of this. All that we know about her right now is that she is giving supplies to the mutant town in exchange for some mutants of her own, and also the Rat King is watching her from the shadows. But alright, that's it. That's pretty much everything you need to know. Before we jump in, let's go ahead and kick this off and see what the Armageddon game is about. Let the games begin. Issue 1 starts off with the Rat King, who in this version of the Turtles is part of the Pantheon family, 8 divine beings that have been around for ages. This family used to play a supernatural game of conquest and chaos throughout Earth's history, manipulating and controlling the lives of others in order to create events in their favor. But now the Rat King has renewed this game, and judging by the name of it, the Armageddon game, the outcome will not be good if the Rat King wins. Now, in the opening pages, he can be seen visiting his sister Kitsune in what is called the Thin Places. This seems to be some type of pocket dimension under ours, sort of like the Upside Down in Stranger Things. Anyways, his sister Kitsune is currently indisposed and is regaining her strength ever since helping the Shredder prepare for the Rat King's Armageddon game. For those who don't know and got this far into the video, the Shredder has recently changed his ways and is now a good guy helping out the Turtles. Anyways, at first, the Rat King's other sister, Eika, who is there watching Kitsune, addresses the Rat King and asks if he's been spying on Kitsune and the Shredder. The Rat King says something along the lines that although he loves chaos, cheating is not his style, that all he knows is that opening moves have been made in this Armageddon game and that he's just there to wish them good luck. Now, although he says this, something about this interaction feels a bit off. He does seem to know a lot about what Kitsune and Shredder have been doing, and when he says, "Let the game truly begin," the expression on his face says a lot. Now, the next part of the story is what we saw in the 5-page preview that came out. We have the Shredder, who's now working with the Turtles, as we discussed earlier, and he's setting up a meeting with the Turtles and his granddaughter, Karai, inside of the Turtles' home. They are telling her about the Rat King's Armageddon game and how the Rat King has recruited Krang, who is currently stuck in Leatherhead's body, by the way. Another recruit is Baxter Stockman, and a character named Madame Null. It appears Karai is hesitant about teaming up at first, but after she hears who the Rat King has recruited for his side, she appears to be on board, and so the Shredder says that they'll have to split up. He tells Karai to focus on keeping watch of the city while Raphael and Jenica keep watch over Mutant Town, the walled off portion of New York City that got mutated back when the mutagen bomb went off around issue 100. Now, meanwhile all this, Donatello will stay back in the Turtles' home since those are the coordinates that he knows best, and he will need to have this as he's going to be teleporting Shredder, Leonardo, and Michelangelo to planet Neutrino of Dimension X to try to recruit some help for the upcoming events the Rat King has planned. Now, the help they're trying to recruit is from a group we haven't seen too much of yet called the Nova Posse. Shredder also mentions eventually going to get help from someone else who is on Earth, but that no one knows of their location. I don't know who he's talking about here, but I have a feeling it's going to be a big reveal and come later on in the story. With all that said, the team understands their mission and they all go on their own way. I found this whole part pretty straightforward, although Karai does mention something about the Shredder getting all this information from Kitsune, and she seems to not like Kitsune's involvement in all this. They've had their history that we can talk about at some point in a separate video, but yeah, Shredder shuts down these doubts immediately and says it doesn't matter where I got this information, that what they need to do is act now. Only thing I'll speculate about this whole interaction here is that maybe just keep an eye on Karai. There seems to be some type of tension there that could backfire on the Turtles and Shredder. So everyone splits up, and probably the most interesting stuff that happens in issue 1 is with Shredder, Leonardo, and Michelangelo. They are teleported to planet Neutrino on Dimension X to look for the Nova Posse and ask them for help. Now, when they arrive, Leonardo and Michelangelo are greeted as friends because of their past helping the Neutrinos, but Commander Dask of the Neutrinos appears to hold Shredder in a separate room due to the Shredder being the Shredder and his past, but eventually he is released. Now, Leo and Mikey are reunited with some old friends here that ended up staying on planet Neutrino in some of the past Turtles adventures. We have the Fugitoid and 2 scientists that have helped out the Turtles in the past, Harold and Libby. So Shredder, Leo, and Mikey wait for the Neutrino royal family to arrive, and when they do, they explain to our team that unfortunately the Neutrinos cannot help the Turtles find the Nova Posse because of a treaty they have with another planet that considers the Nova Posse as traitors, because the posse rebelled against that planet's Chancellor Mazul. We'll see if this guy plays a part later in the story, but yeah, the Neutrino King, although he doesn't agree with everything Chancellor Mazul is doing, he does not want to break the treaty because this could cause something far worse and destabilize everything. So the Turtles think they're out of luck here. Although the Neutrino King has some tricks up his sleeve, he tells Commander Dask that some of the other Neutrinos, Zack and Kala, are due for some well-deserved leave from their royal duties, so like a vacation, and that they should take the Turtles with them on this vacation, unofficially of course. So he's just offering it as a suggestion. So yeah, no doubt this is a way for the Neutrino King to help out the Turtles find the Nova Posse, but off the books, with no record of it, which was pretty cool of him. I thought this part, other than the ending of issue 1 here, was probably the most interesting part of issue 1. It will be cool to see the Shredder, Leo, and Mikey go off in this other dimension and look for and meet the Nova Posse. Let's see what happens in the next issue with these guys. Alright, so let's jump over to what the rest of the Turtles are doing here in this first issue. We jump over first to Raphael and Jenica, and we actually don't spend too much time with them here, but we do see them back in Mutant Town, and now they're accompanied by their friend Sally. They appear to be looking for Old Hob, a character the Turtles have had a complicated past with. First, they were enemies, then they worked together for a little bit, but with reservations about each other, and recently, Old Hob has been at odds with them again, although it's sort of complicated this time. Hob is a wild card for me at this moment in the story. But anyways, if I had to guess, they're looking for him to ask for help to fight against the Rat King. Now, they can't find Old Hob, so they go and ask one of his captured friends from a recent incident, Herman the Crab. Now, Herman won't give up Hob's location, but when he hears that there's a bigger danger coming, he says he'll take them to Old Hob's location, and also that he wants to help in this fight against the Rat King. Like I said, we don't spend too much time here. This part's really quick, but it does raise the question, how will Old Hob react when they come to him for help, especially with that complicated past they've all had together. Now, when it comes to Donatello, we only spent a brief amount of time with him as well. We see him standing by in the Turtles' home on a call, and this is him briefing April, Casey Jones, Angel, and Mona Lisa, and he's just letting them know everything that's going on and coordinating with them. He explains to them the Rat King situation, and they all have questions for him, like what should they be looking out for. He tells them that intel is limited at this point and to just keep an eye out for something that seems out of the ordinary, which Casey Jones scoffs at, as at this point in the story there's a lot of things that are out of the ordinary. Now, April says she'll keep an eye out on Baxter Stockman as she works for him now. But then, just as Donatello is about to end the call, someone comes up behind him, and it's a Triceraton that recently escaped from another evil Utrom, Chirel. Anyways, we don't see what they talk about as this part of the story cuts off right here, but I am curious to see how the Turtles will react to the danger Chirel, the other evil Utrom, poses, and what part Chirel will play in this story. Now, let's get into some of the stuff that the bad guys are up to. We do get some very interesting stuff here, especially at the end. You're not going to want to miss that. That was the part I was looking forward to seeing the most, and we'll break that all down when we get there. But first, let's talk about what we saw with Krang. So first, we see two of Madame Null's mutants trying to capture Krang, who appears to be unable to control Leatherhead's body, which he's currently attached to. It's a long story. Anyways, his body is going berserk, and you can hear Krang yelling at everyone, trying to guide them on how to subdue the body. It takes a sting from Madame Null's scorpion mutant to sedate him, and they are eventually able to capture Krang / Leatherhead, or Leather Krang. Now, Leather Krang is taken to a facility where Madame Null ends up showing up, and the Rat King shows up there as well at the same time. Then we see Dr. Barlow, and now for those who don't know, we've seen this doctor before. He is the one that created this Turtles' version of Venus, and was also seen creating turtle clones, or at least trying to. We suspected that he was working for Madame Null, and now we see them here together, and it appears he will be surgically removing Krang from Leatherhead. And spoiler spoiler warning for some of the upcoming future issues, it does appear, at least from one of the upcoming covers, that he is successful in this. Anyways, we'll wait to see what comes out of this. We also hear Dr. Barlow say that he recently delivered to Madame Knoll mutant turtle DNA that he got from Donatello. Now I wonder if this is how they perfected the creation of the turtle clones that we'll talk about here shortly, as in some of the past Turtles issues we did see that there were some failed attempts before in trying to create these turtle clones. Madame Knoll says that the healing factor of the mutagen ooze in the mutants is just one factor that makes mutants so valuable on the multiversal labor market. Anyways, Rat King's watching all of this go down and he seems to be loving these new developments. I think it's safe to say his plan is going exactly as he wanted. Now, Rat King does say something interesting here when Baxter Stockman's name is brought up. He says that Stockman is set to play his part in tonight's later festivities. And from what we heard from April when she was talking to Donatello, is that Baxter would be giving his State of the City address, as at this point in the story he is the mayor now. And this is where we get what I believe will be the most entertaining element of the Armageddon game, at least in my opinion. So, Baxter is delivering a speech, and he starts to mention Mutant Town, the part of the city that has been walled off due to everyone getting mutated over there. He says we cannot be sure if our mutated neighbors can be trusted, but that everyone can rest assured that he, Baxter Stockman, will keep everyone in the human part of the city safe from any harm that will come from Mutant Town. And this is when someone yells lies, and it cuts over to the 4 Ninja Turtle clones that wear the white face mask that they've been teasing for months now in the comics. But now they're here. They say, safe and secure from the big bad mutants. Let's show everybody what a joke that is, fellas. And they start beating the crap out of everyone. One of the cops, who knows who Michelangelo is, thinks these are the regular turtles, and she starts to approach the one she thinks is Mikey, but the turtle clone clocks her in the face with the nunchucks, and after we can see her questioning who the heck these guys are. Anyways, the turtle clones take Stockman hostage, and security has guns pointed at them now at this point. And this is where issue 1 ends. Let's start off with the way this issue starts. We get a very interesting dream or vision of the future by the character Carmen, a recent student of Leonardo. Anyways, in the dream we see Carmen and Leonardo in the future, and the future looks post-apocalyptic judging by some stuff in the background. We see Leo saying, "Bob, please don't do this," and we see the character of Bob holding what looks like a bomb or something. In the old Archie comics, which was a different continuity, Leo had students named Carmen and Bob, so I think that's what we're seeing here. One of his eventual students that's about to do something drastic. Anyways, Bob says, "I have to," and it zooms out, and it looks like they are at the entrance to a mouth of a giant mechanical shark. Or maybe it's just a machine with blades, but it looks an awful lot like a shark. Leo tells Carmen to go, and we see Leo just leap into the mouth of this machine. But that's where the dream ends, and Carmen wakes up in the Turtles' home. We see the Triceraton girl, Sari, was watching her sleep and gets scared when Carmen wakes up and runs to Donatello, who, if you remember from the Armageddon game #1, is staying back there in the Turtles' home due to his familiarity with the coordinates there. He is to teleport Leonardo, Mikey, and Shredder back from Dimension X when they're done recruiting the Nova Posse. So yeah, we have Donatello hanging out here, and we get some moments here of him introducing April and Carmen to Sari, pretty much explaining her whole situation, how she escaped the island where the evil Utrom Chirel was trying to kill her. And they kind of discuss Chirel a little bit more here in a way that I believe is setting him up as a future big bad in the comics, or maybe just here in the Armageddon game. Maybe he does something in this event. I think either way would be pretty cool. He's definitely big bad material. But yeah, we don't get really anything else in this scene. It's just everybody getting introduced to each other. We do see Siri say she wants to get vengeance on Chirel right now for everything he's done, but Donatello says one thing at a time, that they'll have to wait, but that he promises that she'll get her chance. We'll see what comes out of that. Now, another interesting thing we see in issue 133 is what Venus is up to. They've only showed her a few times so far in these comics, so I'm very curious to see what they end up doing with the character once she's fully involved. The story takes us over to the Foot Clan headquarters, which is now run by Karai, by the way, who for the Armageddon game has teamed up with the Turtles and the Shredder. Anyways, we see Bludgeon, a mutant hammerhead shark who is in the Foot Clan, but he seems to be going down into the lower levels of the headquarters looking for someone. We see then that Venus is here hiding out. In earlier issues, issues we saw that Bludgeon took Venus in since they both have mystical abilities, although he says his powers are nowhere near the level of Venus's power. He asks how Venus is doing, and she says she can't clear her head. For those who don't know, her memory is kind of scrambled. This version of Venus has a pretty messed up origin. She was physically taken apart and put back together and turned into a turtle by Dr. Barlow, so it makes sense that her mind is not quite right yet. Anyways, Bludgeon is trying to help her with meditation, and during this session, something happens. Venus starts thinking about her past, trying to unlock old memories, when all of a sudden, one of her missing arms begins to grow back. They begin to think that her focusing on her lost memories is helping her heal, so they continue to meditate. Here we see Donatello pick up her presence in the astral plane, and he tries to communicate with her. You see, the two have met before when they were both captured by Dr. Barlow. He asks her where she is, but she says she cannot tell him yet, and then the channel is broken and she goes away. Now, one thing Bludgeon mentions in this whole sequence is that he doesn't know how long he can keep her presence here at the Foot Clan headquarters a secret, that they're gonna have to find a new location, so it's gonna be interesting to see where they end up, and also if she's gonna team up with the rest of the Turtles. Alright, next let's talk about what's happening over in Mutant Town at the City Hall. Here, Jennika, the ex-Foot Clan member turned 5th Ninja Turtle, is becoming the constable of Mutant Town since Raphael has left on a mission to look for Old Hob. Now, we see Jennika on patrol here, and all the while we're getting a voiceover of Mona Lisa, who's doing a radio show announcing Jennika as the new constable. You see that some people are taking it well, but others are not. You hear someone say, "How about less people patrolling us?" And Jennika overhears this. Now, this is all going on just as Baxter Stockman begins his address to the city that we saw him do in the Armageddon Game #1. All of Mutant Town is watching the broadcast. Now, just like we saw in the Armageddon Game #1, Baxter tells the human part of the city that although they cannot be sure if their mutated neighbors, the citizens of Mutant Town, can be trusted, that everyone can rest assured that Baxter will keep everyone in the human part of the city safe from any harm that will come. And just like how we saw in the Armageddon Game #1, this is when the Turtle clones attack the crowd of people that are there listening to Baxter. And it's kind of cool because we see it from a different perspective here in this issue. This attack from the Ninja Turtle clones is being broadcast all over the city, and you see everyone freaking out. Donatello is watching from his location, and he cannot believe what he's seeing. All of this causes Mutant Town to destabilize. We see a lot of the people actually thinking that it's the Ninja Turtles that are attacking Stockman, and some of them start to cheer it on. Others start freaking out, saying that they're never going to be allowed to leave Mutant Town because of this. Everything starts to break out into pandemonium, and Jennika starts getting stuff thrown at her. It's pretty wild. She needs backup, so Donatello calls their friend Angel. Once Angel gets the call, she starts to put on her exosuit when all of a sudden an alarm starts going off at the lab she's at. The alarm indicates that an incoming gravitational energy surge is approaching, and you hear it getting closer and closer, and then boom, something bursts into the lab causing an explosion. We see who it is, and they say, "We mean you no harm," but she doesn't believe them, and so she blasts at them and hits one. This is when one of them blasts back, and this knocks out Angel. And then we get a really good look at who it is. It's a group of what looks like 5 mutants, and by the looks of things, there's a fox, a gorilla, the leader, which looks like a dog, and then one that looks like a cat, and this one that looks like a hedgehog or something. The leader, or the dog, has glowing red eyes, which looks pretty cool. We see him say, "Immediate threat is neutralized," talking about Angel. Then he says, "Spread out, search, and destroy," and we see that they're looking at a hologram at what looks like the Triceratops Seri that is currently with Donatello that we spoke about at the beginning of the issue. Now, I don't know who these guys are, but if I had to guess, judging on by who they're looking for, it has to be something to do with Chirel, the evil Utrom. We'll have to wait and see what happens here, but yeah, this is where the issue ends. So the book starts off just how we saw in the 5-page preview that was released. We have the mayor of New York, Baxter Stockman, setting up his new security team. Then we flash over to Baxter getting attacked by the Turtle clones while he was giving his State of the City address. So this is when we get to see his new security team in action for the first time. The team has the Turtles surrounded as the Turtle clones hold Baxter hostage. They actually have a clear shot at one of the Turtle clones, but Baxter says to let them go. He tells them that if the clones release him, that they are free to to return to Mutant Town. This is all being broadcast, by the way, by local news reporters. Now for us reading, this is clearly all for show, and Baxter and the clones are really on the same side, and this will absolutely bring down some heat on the regular Ninja Turtles. Anyways, the clones end up ninja vanishing at this point, and the whole situation comes to an end, with everyone impressed with Baxter Stockman's diplomatic skills, and we're using air quotes there. Although there is one police officer, Detective Lewis, who isn't buying any of this. She knows of the real Turtles, and knows they wouldn't do something like this. We'll see what larger role she plays in this story as it goes on. Alright, let's check out a couple other things that happened before we get into the actual meat of the story, which mostly takes place in Dimension X. But first up, we have Karai. We see what she's up to. She's watching the news report of the Turtle clones attacking Baxter Stockman, and it's Byrne Thompson doing the news report, by the way. Her two soldiers that are with her are bickering in the background, debating whether it's actually the Ninja Turtles that are committing this attack or not. One of them mentions that how could it be them if half of them are off-world somewhere, speaking of Michelangelo and Leonardo, who are in Dimension X. Although the other one says, but there's more than just 4 Ninja Turtles nowadays, referring to Jenica and Venus, and I would imagine Lita too, or at least future Lita. Karai doesn't say anything though about whether she thinks it's the actual Ninja Turtles or not. She's just watching, so I'm curious if this is going to change her perception of this whole team up with the Turtles and Shredder. She already has expressed her dislike of Kitsune's involvement. Kitsune's another character, by the way, in this story, and the love interest for Shredder. But yeah, Karai already expressed doubts about that, so I wonder if this could potentially sway her in a different direction. We'll see exactly what happens in future issues. Now next, it jumps us over to what Raphael's doing, and this is literally like 2 pages long. Last time we heard about Raphael was that he was out looking for Old Hob, and we see that Old Hob got a new place, and he thinks it's like this secret location that no one's gonna know about. We see that he's there with the Weasel kids that he takes care of, and they don't seem to like this new place. They call it spooky, and one of the Weasel kids asks, what if the mean humans find them, as this is outside of Mutant Town. When all of a sudden someone says, yeah, Fleabag, what are you gonna do if they find you here? And it's Raphael. He's found Old Hob, and he appears to be arriving surfing on the back of Herman the Crab. Alright, let's jump over to Dimension X. This is where a bulk of the story from issue 2 happens. So we have Leonardo, Michelangelo, and the Shredder, and they're with the Neutrinos, Kala and Zack. The Turtles are being taken to an interdimensional way station located on a volcanic asteroid. It's the home to the Blastorama Pleasure Dome, as one of them says, a favorite hangout of crooks and criminals from all across Dimension X. When they arrive, they are told to dock by a character that looks an awful lot like the Garbage Man character from the 2003 TMNT show. I believe it's him. Anyways, it appears the team is going to split up. Zack and Michelangelo will stay there at the way station and look for the Nova Posse, while Shredder, Leonardo, and Kala will travel to Dimension Z and look for the character of Cherubae. The old Archie comics from the 80s and 90s also had the same character, in that she possessed something called the Turnstone, and from the little we've seen of her in this version of the Turtles, she also has something called the Turnstone. In the old Archie comics, whoever wielded the Turnstone could transform people or objects into anything the user wanted. It's how the character of Leatherhead was created in those Archie comics. Anyways, that's a different version of the Turtles, but it is interesting to see how they're going to use the Turnstone in this new version of the Turtles. So yeah, the team's about to split up when all of a sudden a member of the Neutrino royal family shows up to join the Turtles, Princess Trib, and Mikey is very excited to see her. Now this is not necessarily great news for everyone though. This could get her father into some trouble, the king. If somebody notices her, this can mess up a big treaty her father has with a different ruler, as this whole search for the Nova Posse was supposed to be under the radar. We even see Zack going off on her about this, that the mission was supposed to be unofficial, and that if even one person sees her, it could cause a diplomatic nightmare on a galactic scale, and he's not wrong. She says though that she's not on any official record, and that she will join them on this mission. So Zack gives her a cloak and tells her not to take off the hood. I don't know if this is going to backfire on them, but we'll see. Next, Mikey provides some funny moments here saying, I'll totally help you take care of the princess. Now, before the team splits up, we see them go into this place called the Smasherino Arena, and it looks like a place to go watch some fights. We see our group approach a hooded figure and ask him for transport to Dimension Z. He does help them out, and so Kala pays him, though the hooded man seems to be in a hurry and tells our team that a signal has been sent out and that their ride to Dimension X will be arriving in the docking bay. He says he's hard to miss, as he describes who will be picking them up. Now, just as they finish this conversation, we hear people approaching, and the hooded man gives Kala a small creature that he was holding just as he begins to run away. And we hear the people that are approaching say, "We've got a runner." Now, these people happen to be the Nova Posse, and they begin to chase the hooded man. They continue to chase him, and we see that the whole Nova Posse is coordinating with each other to try to capture him. We see what I believe are some Star Wars Easter eggs here as well, which I thought was pretty cool. Eventually, the hooded man tricks them by using a hologram of himself, and so he escapes. This is when Leonardo, Michelangelo, the Shredder, and the Neutrinos catch up to the Nova Posse. The Neutrinos and the Nova Posse greet one another as they seem to know each other, and the Neutrinos introduce the Turtles and the Shredder to the Posse. The Nova Posse recognize the Turtles and say that any soldier in Dimension X worth their salt knows who they are, and they continue by calling them the glorious heroes of the Krang War. This is an event, by the way, that took place a while back in the IDW Comics storyline. The Nova Posse say that the guy they were after is a big-time smuggler, and that he's the Posse's latest bounty, so it appears that they are bounty hunters here. Anyways, they call him Torben Zix, another character who also came out in the 2003 cartoon, by the way. He was a smuggler in that too, and had respect for the Turtles' abilities, but would often take advantage of them for his own purposes, doing things the Turtles didn't agree with. So the Neutrinos ask what was he smuggling, and Commander Azul of the Nova Posse touches the little creature that was left behind and says that, and others like it. She also says that they are very rare and extremely valuable. But then Commander Azul asks them why the Turtles were looking for the Nova Posse. That's when the Neutrino Zack explains that they need help with the situation back on Earth involving Krang and Chirel, that the Posse's past experience with those two could help the Turtles squash them once and for all. Unfortunately though, Commander Azul says no, that they would love to, but that they need to catch Torben Zix, that they've pretty much staked their reputations as bounty hunters on capturing him. And this is when we get the Neutrino Princess that we spoke of earlier removing her hood, and she says, "What if we were to assist in completing the job of capturing Torben?" And you can see the face of the other Neutrinos here get worried as she has now exposed herself, which could have some potentially bad ramifications like we spoke of earlier. Anyways, after this, the Nova Posse says that they're in, but then it cuts to a shot of Shredder, who hasn't said anything the entire issue. He's just kind of been standing there. And this shot's pretty cool, the way they portrayed him. He's kind of just sitting there with his head in the shadows and his eyes are glowing. He tells Michelangelo to remain with the Neutrinos and the Nova Posse and to help them with their bounty, while he and Leonardo will go to Dimension Z. You can tell Shredder wants to go alone with Leo on this one, probably to teach him some type of lesson, if I had to guess. In the comics leading up to this Armageddon Game event, he was teaching all the Turtles different lessons, and Leonardo's lesson kind of seemed like it had a to be continued attached to it, so I feel like we're going to get a continuation of that with this trip that they're taking to Dimension Z. Anyways, Leo doesn't say anything, he's just standing there looking serious. You can tell he kind of senses that they're about to go do something. Now, just as they're finishing up this conversation, suddenly Cuddly, the transdimensional cowlick, arrives, and that's the ride that they're going to get to Dimension Z. It's just this giant cow head floating in space. This is also an old Archie Comics character, for those who don't know, and I believe that that version could cross between continuities. I'm pretty sure he appeared in the Mirage universe a couple times as well. I wonder if he's doing the same thing here, and if it's that same version of him, or if this is a brand new version of him. Anyways, you can see that this opens a lot of potential of stories they could tell. I'm specifically thinking of different continuities of the Turtles. Let's see what happens, but that's where this issue ends. Alright, so Alliance number 1 focuses on Karai and her first confrontation with the Ninja Turtle clones in New York, so not inside of Mutant Town. We'll get to there a little bit later. The book starts off with her having a dream. First in her dream she has Shredder appear, but he still seems kinda evil and tells her that most of her accomplishments in the Foot Clan have been a byproduct of someone else's orders, and that those that have his blood running through them must lead on their own or must die. This is when the dream changes, and now she's with Macedo, former leader of the Foot Clan from centuries ago, who back then was killed by the Shredder, by the way. He pretty much tells her that he doesn't seek to influence her decisions, but rather just to urge caution, that now that she's rebuilt the Foot Clan, she shoulders a big responsibility, and that the Foot Clan is destined to shape the world. He seems to think that Karai has a fear of such a big responsibility, and that she must shed those fears. This is when Karai begins not to believe him, saying that no master of the Foot Clan would sound like such a psychoanalyst. This is when he appears to throw a ninja star at her, as he says he will provide proof. We next see her waking up in her bed, and it appears she has a scratch on her cheek from the ninja star. She takes this whole dream as a bad omen and grabs her phone. She can see news stories of the Ninja Turtles clone attacks. She seems to know it's not the actual Turtles, so there's that. We had been wondering from a previous issue if she suspected that, and now we know. She definitely knows it's not the real Turtles. She even says about the clones that even the idiot in the orange mask, talking about Michelangelo, is more competent than the clones she's seen in these videos on her phone. So this is the first hint we get of the level of skills these Turtles have. Clearly they're not as good at fighting as the real Turtles, which we'll see more of here in a minute. Anyways, she knows it's a ruse, fake Ninja Turtles, but still, the timing of this with everything else that's been going on in this Armageddon game bugs her. So she goes out to get some air and jumps across rooftops to think it over. She ponders over the dream she had, having doubts about her leadership, when all of a sudden, a ninja star goes zipping past her face. This gets her on her toes, and she sees that the Ninja Turtle clones were the ones who threw it. This gets her wondering, how is this possible? In a city this size, the odds of them meeting like this is very unlikely. This is when she asks the Turtle clones if they believe in fate. The Turtle clones say that's the dumbest question they've ever heard, and one of them says, let's take her down and be done with it. A fight begins with the Turtle clones talking as they fight, saying that the Foot Clan maybe aren't a threat like they were before, but that they're still a threat, and that they take care of threats in the city. I wonder who they're getting these orders from. Probably Baxter Stockman, as he's the only one we've seen have interactions with these Turtle clones so far. But we still haven't seen all the members of the bad guys together in one area yet, like discussing how these events in the Armageddon game will play out. A quick refresher on the bad guys in this Armageddon game: it's Baxter Stockman, Krang, Madame Null, these Turtle clones, Dr. Barlow, the fellow who created these clones, and the Rat King at the head of it all. There's also Chirel, the other evil Utrom, but he seems to be separate from the bad team, although his story seems to be on a collision course with everyone else here. Anyways, so Karai is fighting the Turtle clones, and now she can really tell they're not as good as the regular Turtles. When she gets them one-on-one, she can handle them pretty easily. It's not till they attack her as a group that she takes a few hits here and there. Towards the end of the fight, she's really handling them pretty easily. The Turtles genuinely look scared at the end. She has all four of them up against the ropes, and it looks like if she wanted to, she could put an end to them. And she even tells them, you're afraid. At least you're smart enough to know that you should be. And this is when the police sirens begin to approach. The Turtle clones say fall back and run off. Karai stands there, saying, I will see you again, imposters, and next time you won't be so lucky. Now, the events of the day were exactly what Karai needed to reflect on all these dreams she had earlier, and she seems to figure some stuff out. When she gets back to the headquarters, she says she's going to disobey Shredder's orders of keeping watch of the city, and instead will leave to go seek alliances and to build a new foundation for the Foot Clan. That Shredder does not lead the Foot Clan anymore, which is true, but still, I wonder how he's going to take it if this goes wrong. Anyways, she says that she will return and she won't be long, and that Bebop and Rocksteady will be going with her, which jumps us over to the ending of this first book. Over at the Foot Clan's training facility, we see Bebop and Rocksteady meeting with Karai. She tells them something that she only chooses to tell them because she trusts them, and that's that the Foot Clan is going to change the way it does business, that they're going to be more powerful than they've ever imagined, but that they will do it in a way that Shredder never could, building and enhancing alliances through mutual profit, respect, or fear, and that people will be protected and that the Foot Clan will thrive. This is when Bebop and Rocksteady ask how they can help with this, and she tells them that she wants them to join her while she reaches out to those she wants to ally with more closely to help her find them and provide muscle if necessary. This is when Bebop and Rocksteady get a little bit more excited, and it seems like the first person they're going to seek is Casey Jones. Now, that's where Alliance number 1 ends. So issue 134 starts off, and now we're in Mutant Town, and it's absolute chaos. Ever since Baxter Stockman staged the Turtle clones attacking him, it got everyone in Mutant Town thinking it was the actual Turtles, and it gets everybody riled up. They've been walled off in Mutant Town for so long now by Baxter Stockman, and this attack has just pushed everyone over the edge. A lot of people think it's the actual Ninja Turtles signaling to everybody to start pushing back against the humans. Now, there are some that are paying attention to some of the details, like the white turtle masks, and they can kind of tell it's not the real Turtles. They think this is all staged and orchestrated to cause chaos, which that is what it seems like to us, the reader, but regardless, this doesn't stop everyone else from plunging Mutant Town into complete pandemonium. There's just too many mutants destroying everything. Now, Jenica, who has been the constable of the town ever since Raphael went off on his own mission, is trying to put out some of the fires, literally and figuratively. And even from the beginning when she became constable, people already didn't doesn't like her presence. So now that everything is going downhill, they definitely are not listening to her. It even gets to the point where a group of mutants begin chasing her, saying you don't belong here. She's able to get away and finds her friend Jay, who has made a new friend in all this craziness that's been going on. Now this is when Jennika gets a call from the character of Sheena, who says mutants are getting dragged out of their homes by other mutants where she is living and that she needs help. So Jennika makes her way there, and when she gets there, she is able to clear everyone out. So that's good, everyone's safe now, and they begin to leave and go stay at the lair instead. But just as they're leaving, that original group that was chasing Jennika shows up and corners them. Jennika, being the best fighter there, out of her and her friends, begins swinging on everybody, but there's just too many of them and they end up jumping her with metal pipes. Then they go after her friends. Now just in time, Casey Jones shows up to help, and he looks amazing, by the way. They gave him this like old school 1990s look that we haven't really seen in a while, and it looks really cool. Anyways, Casey is able to clear the room and everyone's just happy to see him again. He mentions that things outside of Mutant Town are also getting pretty hairy. They discuss the turtle clones and how some think that they're heroes for doing this. And this is when Jennika starts feeling a bit down about everything. She feels now everyone doesn't see her as the hero anymore after the way everything has happened. It's very interesting to see Jennika take a loss here. It was pretty bad too, when she was getting jumped with those metal pipes and stuff. I think this will probably set her up to eventually winning the support of everyone in Mutant Town by the end. She's probably going to do something to save the town or something, if I had to guess. But let's wait and see what they do. Let's jump over to what Donatello was up to. Donatello is back at the lair, and he says he has to stay there, controlling the teleporter that took Leonardo, Michelangelo, and the Shredder to Dimension X to seek help for all this chaos going on in the Armageddon game. Although Donatello is also feeling the urge that he has to leave. As we saw in the last issue of this story, his friend Angel was attacked, and he has to go check on her to make sure she's okay. So he leaves the Triceraton girl Siri, Leo's student Carmen, and Lita, the little pink turtle, in charge of monitoring his systems as he goes off real quick to check up on Angel. He tells them to call him if anything pops up, and he heads out. On his way, he's seeing all the destruction of Mutant Town as he jumps across rooftops. At one point, he briefly is able to communicate with Venus through the astral plane as he's done before. She's meditating wherever she's at, and she tells Donatello she wishes she could help, but that she can't. Donnie seems frustrated about her inability to help and pretty much just hangs up the astral plane line and keeps going. He arrives at Angel's place and it's all blown up. If you remember from the last issue, a group of what looked like mutants showed up and blasted the place. Dawn finds Angel and she tells him that they look like mutants, but that there's no way that they're regular mutants. And this is when Donatello finds an arm that Angel blasted off one of them, and you can see that it's a robotic arm. These are indeed not regular mutants. Donatello says he recognizes the tech and that it's Utrom tech. This is when he starts freaking out because the evil Utrom, Chirel, has been trying to hunt down the Triceraton girl that's back at his lair, Siri. He does appear to be correct, as we did see these mutant attackers, when they attacked, pull out a picture of Siri when they had first arrived. This is when Donnie is given the anti-gravity gauntlet and immediately heads back to the lair. Now, when he gets back, luckily nothing has happened. He explains to everyone that the Utroms are most likely coming. He mentions something about running some experiments, and then we see him messing with a stone he got when he was training with Shredder that seems to have some type of mystical properties. We see him performing a technique he learned with the Shredder when doing this experiment. I wonder what he's exactly trying to work on here. He does mention something about the anti-gravity gauntlet when referring to this experiment, so I'm thinking maybe he's going to use the anti-gravity gauntlet to amplify this technique. I'm not quite sure yet, but yeah, things are getting pretty real now. There's just so much happening all at the same time. And it's also around this time that he also gets a call from Jennika, who is also heading there to the lair, and he says he's going to start locking down the lair and tells her to hurry up before he does so. Now this is where I think things are going to go sideways. Remember that new friend that was with Jennika's friend Jay when we spoke earlier about that? I would imagine he definitely overheard this call, and at the very end of this comic it is revealed that this new friend is one of the Utroms pretending to be a mutant. You could see that one of his eyes begins to glow red, and you can also see a little face in his abdomen area underneath the shirt, which seems to be smiling. He most likely is going to relay this information about everyone going back to the lair to the rest of the Utroms, and the lair is probably going to get attacked. But yeah, that's where the issue ends. So issue 3 picks up in New York City. It's nighttime and the Rat King is singing a tune of the apocalyptic events to come. We don't stay here long, it's just one page, but as he walks away, we see someone creeping behind him. It's his brother, Gathano. Now, I'm not sure what this means exactly, but earlier back when the Rat King's Armageddon game was about to kick off, he did approach each one of his siblings, asking if they were interested in still playing this ancient game. Although at the time, everyone just seemed uninterested in playing, and they all found it kind of pointless. But now as Rat King's series of events have started to roll, we see his brother, Gathano, may have changed his mind. We'll see what comes of this. The story next jumps over to Raphael and Old Hob. Raphael has found where Old Hob is, with the help of Herman the Crab. Raphael and Hob talk about what's going on, the Armageddon game, all the bad guys teaming up. And Raphael thinks Old Hob could help the Turtles, at least with dealing with Baxter Stockman, as Old Hob, right before the Armageddon game began, really got into Baxter Stockman's head, and Hob seems to know some of Baxter's weaknesses. Now, Old Hob seems more interested in building a new community on this island that he's found, calling it Mutant Island. He doesn't like how back in the city, Mutant Town is walled off, and it seems like before he's even gonna think about helping Raphael and the Turtles, that he wants to tear down Baxter Stockman's wall around Mutant Town, but that they're gonna need some help. Raphael asks Old Hob if he's gonna use a mutant bomb again like he did in the past, which created the mutants in Mutant Town, by the way. Hob says no, that believe it or not, he just wants to give the folks back their freedoms. This is when something strange happens. It appears Shredder starts talking to Raphael telepathically. He says, to win the coming fight, you will need to connect with your enemy, walk with them. I believe he is telling Raph here to help out Old Hob, so that Hob can eventually help the Turtles in return. Now, if some of you remember back before the Armageddon game began, Shredder showed the Turtles what looked like some mystical techniques, and he tells Raph to use them sparingly and in secrecy. But here Raphael says screw it, and his eyes begin to glow, and it appears his technique gives him the ability to read someone's thoughts, and he sees that Old Hob is telling the truth. Hob and everyone else notice the change in Raph's appearance and ask what that was. Raph says not to worry about it, and that he's ready to join Old Hob in going back to Mutant Town. Next, let's talk about what the Turtle Clones and Baxter Stockman are up to. Here we see the Turtle Clones, and they're at the TCRI headquarters. They have broken in and are quickly trying to do something. At first, we don't see exactly what it is. We see them killing some guards, but by the end of it, they stick some bombs to the building, and then it cuts to the outside of the building, and we see a whole floor explode. Now we jump over to a little bit later, and Baxter Stockman is now doing an interview with the news in front of the TCRI building that the Turtle Clones just blew up. Now, as we, the reader, know, the clones and Stockman are in cahoots, and this just seems to be Baxter Stockman continuing to build his case on framing the regular Ninja Turtles. He tells the news reporters that they got footage of the Turtles doing it, and that they killed innocent security guards, and that back earlier, when he had ordered them to be let go when they had him hostage, was a mistake. Obviously, we all know that that was also a staged event where the Turtle Clones had him hostage. Anyways, it's pretty much implied that they're gonna go after the regular Turtles now, and the way he's orchestrated all this will probably give him support from most of the people. The interview ends and we see Stockman get into a limo, where inside Madame Knoll is waiting for him. She tells him yet another fine performance for the cameras. He tells her he's a better actor than her idiot Ninja Turtle clones. So it looks like they belong straight up to Madame Knoll, and she's just lending them to Stockman. We kind of knew some of this, but this is the first time we kind of hear it explained the way it's all set up. Baxter complains that it's getting harder and harder to cover their sloppiness, although Madame Knoll tells Baxter not to worry, that the clones have gotten him this far, and when they are no longer of use, that they will become immediately disposable. And you find out that that's the same plan Baxter has for his security team that was introduced earlier in the story. The two drive away, and we see that Detective Lewis was nearby, and it appears she may have overheard some of what they discussed. We'll see. Now, not much else here on Stockman and the Turtle Clones, except for a little part where we see Baxter Stockman's security team that we just talked about scoping out Mutant Town. It seems like Baxter has them stationed there on purpose. If you remember, the whole town is rioting because of everything going on with them being walled off and the fake Ninja Turtles attacking humans, things like that. It's just causing a bunch of destabilization. Now, this is when one of Baxter's security team sees the Ninja Turtle clones off in the distance. It appears he's going to go after them, but that's where this part leaves off, so we'll see what comes of it in later issues. We jump over to Leonardo and the Shredder as they're traveling inside Cuddly the Cow on their way to Dimension Z. Now, they appear to be training as they get to their destination. Shredder says that the dark version of Leonardo is still in him. You see, early on in the IDW comics, Leonardo got turned bad by the Shredder using some kind of mysticism and fought alongside the Shredder for a little bit. Now, eventually he was able to snap out of it, though the dark version of him always lingered inside, and Shredder here now tells Leonardo that he inhabits you. You inhabit him. Yin, yang. Then we get a really cool cool moment here with the Shredder and Leonardo sparring, and Leonardo turns into his dark form as he's fighting the Shredder. Although good Leonardo seems to be in control, at least a little bit. When the sparring is over, Leonardo is able to turn back into his normal form, and the Shredder tells him that this is good. Leonardo's powers have advanced, and I think he's talking about Leonardo's ability to go from Dark Leonardo to regular Leonardo. Next, we get a little bit of a conversation here with Cuddly the cow talking to Shredder and Leo, which is kind of interesting, as it's almost like we get Cuddly projecting his own mind into his own head where Shredder and Leonardo are sitting. It gives us a little bit of an idea of how Cuddly's powers work. He tells Leonardo that he's impressed with how Leo was able to switch from dark to light like that, and that he, Cuddly, is naturally drawn to those with the righteous aura, that some people's auras are good, but that others, like Torb and Zix, have an aura that's gray and just need a little bit more guidance to move into the light, and that's where he comes in. Cuddly. Leo asks, but isn't Zix a smuggler? To where Cuddly responds that just because you carry a black blade doesn't always mean you carry a black heart, and we see Shredder looking down somberly, which makes sense because currently he is in this redemption arc, having done so many bad things in the past and now being the new trainer of the Ninja Turtles. Now this is when they arrive to their destination in Dimension Z, and Leo says, I wonder how Mikey and the others are doing. Now let's jump over to Michelangelo. He's with the Nova Posse and the Neutrinos, who, if you remember from the last breakdown, are in Dimension X chasing down Torb and Zix, who has a bounty on his head. We see that they arrive at some type of asteroid belt and that they have a hot read on one of Zix's ships. We see that Zix's ship has broken down nearby, and this is when the Nova Posse, the Neutrinos, and Michelangelo surround him. They tell him he's outgunned, outflanked, and Mikey says out jetpacked, as we see him in a jetpack suit, although Zix isn't going down easy. He tells them that before he surrenders, that his contraband, those sleepy little creatures that he's smuggling, aren't exactly what they appear to be, that they are intelligent, have natural telekinetic abilities, and have a keen sense of smell. Also, that they have to stay on a strict liquid diet, that if they're even given a crumb of solid food, they will morph into a great big vicious hunter tracker, virtually uncontrollable, he says, and that some other characters named Stump and Sling are trying to capture these creatures and make them rip one another into pieces during the main ticket at the next Grapple Gonza, some type of fighting event, and that a conservation group called the Caretakers hired him to get these creatures to an exotic species sanctuary. This is when the Neutrino Princess asks Commander Azul of the Nova Posse if they should reconsider the situation, but Commander Azul says they weren't hired to make ethical judgments, as she orders another member of the Nova Posse, Grotto, to cuff Zix. This is when Zix says he is not exactly what he appears to be either, and we see, just like the last time the Nova Posse encountered him, that this was a hologram of him all along. The Nova Posse starts scrambling. We see that Commander Azul gets a message saying that they're now picking up multiple readings on Zix and his ship on the asteroid that they're on, that it's like he's everywhere and nowhere all at once. Azul commands the team to sweep the entire asteroid and find him. You can tell Commander Azul has had it, as she says, this ends today. The team begins to look around and only find more holograms, and in an unexpected moment, we see Shredder begin to talk telepathically to Michelangelo, similar to how we saw him do with Raphael, saying, you learn best through your connection with others. You observe others and learn most effectively when in a group. You will breathe harmony where there is none, both in battle and in peace. And then we see Michelangelo's eyes begin to glow, just like Raphael's did earlier. Mikey says, I've got it, and he blasts off in his jetpack. He goes up into the ship that was floating up above, and he goes inside. He goes to the little creature that Zix left behind when they had met last time. It's the same as those other little creatures that he's smuggling. Michelangelo gives it some solid food. The creature transforms, just how Zix had said earlier, and Mikey also remembers that Zix said it was good at tracking and had a keen sense of smell. So Mikey tells the creature to smell a blanket that Zix had gave it, and the creature begins to track him. It immediately begins running, and Mikey follows it by using his jetpack. We cut to Zix, who sees the creature coming. Just as he finishes, the creature confronts him and begins some type of attack with its antenna, lifting Zix up into the air. Mikey thinks it's going to kill Zix and begins to use his new abilities taught to him by Shredder as his eyes begin to glow again, and he says, Harmony Battle 2. And this is when we see the creature release Zix and the Nova Posse show up and cuff him. But now that they've all seen that he wasn't lying about the creatures, the Neutrino Princess says that they cannot let these things fight for blood sport like Zix was talking about, that they should, with the help of Zix, take these creatures to that sanctuary. Zix says you're doing the right thing as they begin to uncuff him. The princess says one more thing, that she will pay everyone involved, so pretty much match what they were expecting to get paid for their initial contracts from the people that hired them, to keep the princess's involvement in all this secret. If you remember from an earlier issue, if word gets out that a member of the royal family family is working with the Nova Posse, it will break some massive intergalactic treaty that the king is trying to preserve. Everyone seems to agree with this, and this is when the neutrino Zack says, speaking of royalty, that it would be a good time to take the princess back home before she is missed. The princess agrees, and this is when we see everyone go their own way. We see that the Nova Posse commander asks Mikey if he's ready to go back to Earth and deal with their Utrom problem. So there we go. Michelangelo is coming back to Earth with the Nova Posse on board to help out. I wonder if they're going to wait for Leonardo and the Shredder before heading back home. I would imagine they would, but let's see what happens next. Now, all Michelangelo says when the commander asks him this is that he's ready, but just hopes it's not too late. And this takes us to the last couple pages, which reveal that maybe Michelangelo and them could be too late, as we see that the Rat King and Dr. Barlow, who are at the Earth Protection Force facility back on Earth, have finished operating on Leather Krang. Dr. Barlow was gonna surgically remove Krang from Leatherhead's abdomen here, and the procedure now appears to have been completed. The Rat King congratulates Dr. Barlow on being able to keep Leatherhead alive, as Dr. Barlow will get to keep Leatherhead, I would imagine, for experiments, or maybe even use him as a muscle for his protection later on. Now, Dr. Barlow says that it's going to be hard to keep him alive, and that even if his body heals, the mental trauma that happened because of the failed symbiosis with the alien parasite might not heal as easily. This is when we hear a voice from off frame say that pathetic beast was mentally defective well before the so-called symbiosis ever took place, and that you would do well to keep your own self alive by more cautiously choosing your words, Doctor. Alien or parasite? No, I am Metal Krang. And we see that Krang is back, and that he's been put into the body of Metalhead. This is going to be absolutely insane. This book ends here. So Alliance number 2 starts off with Casey Jones on a rooftop of a building eating a pizza all alone. He's on lookout on the human side of the city when all of a sudden a lost dog approaches him, which is a bit odd. What is a lost dog doing on top of this rooftop? Casey even says something to this effect, but nevertheless Casey shares his pizza with the dog. And as he does so, he begins to vent some of his thoughts on how Raph's been too busy for him lately and how they've kind of had a falling out. All of this happened leading up to this Armageddon Game event, by the way. Anyways, he says that they haven't really resolved it and that now he doesn't have anyone. No mom, no dad, no purple dragons, which he says he's split from, that they all turned anti-mutant, and that yeah, he's all alone now. He continues to talk to the dog when all of a sudden the dog starts barking. The dog runs off and jumps into a family's window, and it's the dog's family, and everyone's happy to see it again. Casey looks on, happy for the little dude, when suddenly he gets a call from Donatello. Donatello is checking in on Casey and seeing if he has anything to report. Casey says it's been quiet, but that people in the city aren't happy with the Turtles, that they think that the Turtles are responsible for what happened at the TCRI building, which we as readers all know was actually the Turtle clones. Donnie tells him best thing to do right now is to keep watch outside the walls of Mutant Town. You can see that Casey wants to keep talking with Donatello and asks how he and Raph and the others are doing, but Don tells Casey that he can't really talk and that they'll catch up later. They hang up and Casey looks sad, but then someone off frame says, "Ew, yuck." We see Casey look down into an alley and we see that the punk frogs are down there and they're eating old pizza out of the trash. Casey finds it strange that they're outside of Mutant Town, and so he begins to follow them. You hear them talking about the turtle situation at the TCRI building. Some of the frogs believe it was the Turtles, but one of them, Genghis, thinks the Turtles wouldn't do that. Another one speaks up as well and says something similar, but then the others start saying that the Turtles just pretend to be nice to recruit more soldiers, but that the Turtles are actually really bad. The group of frogs begin to argue when all of a sudden Casey Jones's phone goes off. The frogs yell, "Show yourself," and so Casey puts on his mask and jumps down into the alley. Casey tells them that they better go, that if not he's gonna beat them all up. A couple of the punk frogs say they don't want to fight and that they got nowhere to go, but Casey doesn't believe them and says he's not buying their sob story and to get lost. One of them tries to tell Casey that they're already lost, but then without warning, one of the bigger frogs, Rasputin, pulls out a bow and arrow and shoots it, narrowly missing Casey's head. This is when Casey goes crazy and he starts swinging. You see the frogs telling each other that he's become unhinged, just like the Turtles that blew up the TCRI building, and they knock Casey Jones down. This is when Casey starts defending the Turtles a little bit, and he says that they didn't do that, but the frogs don't believe him and surround Casey. Casey says enough and begins to strike back while telling the frogs that they don't know what they're talking about, that the Turtles have done and are doing everything they can to make the city safer for mutants, and that they've been framed to make mutants turn on one another. And just as he says this, we hear a voice say, "Well, well, well," and we see that Casey and the punk frogs, while fighting each other, have become surrounded confronted by the purple dragons. One of the purple dragons says, "Looks like our old so-called mutant sympathizer leader is out busting some mutant skull." Another one of the dragons says, "Once a dragon, always a dragon." Casey tells them to back off, that this doesn't concern them, but the dragons see it otherwise. This is when the punk frogs ask Casey, who are they? And Casey says, just some leaderless losers. And this is when the new co-leaders, Mallow, Chun, and Link announce themselves. And they say that they're no longer Huns or the Foot Clan's lackeys no more, and that they ain't Casey's anymore either, that he abandoned them. So to either keep beating up the mutants or to move out of the way. You see that the frogs begin to get worried as there's no way out. This is when Casey turns around to the frogs and says, whatever beef that they have with him can wait, that the purple dragons aren't messing around, and that they'll kill the frogs, that they need to create a window to escape. And so Casey and the frogs leap forward and begin to fight the purple dragons. A brawl breaks out, with Casey and the frogs fighting pretty good together. At the end of the fight, one of the leaders of the purple dragon, Mallow, gets in Casey's face and tells him to look at the freaks of nature that he's defending. That Casey's dad, Hun, would have never done that, and that they thought Casey was the same way because of the way that he ditched his broad after she mutated, who we all know as Jenica. Then he gets really personal with Casey. He tells Casey that she was a real piece of tail before she mutated into one of those green freaks. This causes Casey to snap, and he goes to town on the purple dragons, yelling at them as he wails on them, saying he never wanted to lead them, and that he was just doing a favor for Splinter, who was a great man, making the best out of a bad situation, but that deep down he knew they could never be good, that they're nothing but a bunch of scumbags, and that they're not his responsibility to change anymore. Then we see that it's all over, Casey standing over them as they all lie there bloody and beaten. The frogs look on, and you hear one of them say, "Let's move." Shortly after, we see the frogs walking with Casey, celebrating their recent win. One of the frogs tells Casey that was a lot of heavy stuff Casey let out back there. Casey responds with, he's been through a lot lately. The frog tells Casey that if he ever needs to talk about it with anybody, that he'd be glad to listen. Casey says thanks as he parts ways. One of the other frogs tells Casey thanks, that they don't get help from anyone these days, to where Casey responds, us strays gotta stick together, a nice tie-in to the start of the book with the dog. Now at the end of the book, we see that Casey is at April O'Neil's place. They were the ones that were calling earlier, by the way, that gave up Casey's location to the frogs. Anyways, Casey's over there and he's helping them move some boxes. April's dad seems to have blown out his back, but you can tell Casey is happy to be with friends again. They have Casey move a box into an upstairs room where they have him open it. Inside is some hockey and sports gear that they're giving him. He asks them why they had him bring it upstairs, to where they say, since Casey's dad just passed away, they figured he might want a place that he can come back to from time to time, that it ain't the Ritz, but that if he ever needs a home-cooked meal or just a friendly face, that he could crash there. Casey hugs them and thanks them. April's dad tells him if he's hungry that they have a ton of leftovers. Casey says he's good, but that if they're willing to part ways with it, he does know somebody who may need it. Later on, we see Casey dropping off the food to the punk frogs. They're super thankful, and Casey tells them that they'll see. The turtles are good, that they just have to clear their good names. The frogs are skeptical, but are willing to see what happens, and then Casey goes off. Jumping across rooftops, you can see him talking to himself, saying there's so much confusion in the city right now, that he just hopes for all their sakes it gets a little easier. Now, during the epilogue, it jumps us over to the following night, and we see that Casey is confronted by Karai. She says she's there to ask for help. Casey pretty much tells her it sounds like she wants him to join a gang or something, and that he's not doing that again, considering he just broke away from the purple dragons. She goes on and explains how there hasn't been balance in the Foot Clan for a long time, that yes, throughout their history they've been assassins, thieves, but also protectors of life and property, and that she's seeking to regain that balance. Casey's having a hard time believing her, until she humbly asks that all she will need from him would be to have him as an advisor, that his unique point of view of a lone vigilante to leader of the purple dragons is valuable, and that she comes to him alone out of respect. Casey is taken back by this, and then she does say to have him as an ally in battle would also be welcome, but that's not his true value. She asks again and says it would be an honor, and she sticks out her hand for him to shake it. Then you hear a voice in her head say, you know what he wants to hear, say it. And then we hear her humbly say, please, Casey. Casey proceeds to shake her hand and says, well, if you can grow a little, I can try as well. And that's where the book ends. So the story starts off with Donatello in his lab. He seems to be running experiments with that crystal he got when training with the Shredder a while back, and he calls it a thin place crystal. Now the thin place has been referenced before. It seems to be some type of pocket dimension within our dimension. We've seen the Rat King in it sometimes. It's almost like wormholes that he uses to get to different places on Earth. We've also seen his sister, or Shredder's love interest here in the story, regaining her strength there at the moment. She's currently incapacitated. I'm sure sure they'll circle back around to that at some point. But anyways, Donatello looks to be installing pieces of the crystal into a weapon that he possesses called the Anti-Gravity Gauntlet. He says that it powers it on, but that it's inefficient. He says that until he can determine where the crystal's power comes from, he won't know the limits this energy has, but that it's a promising start. Now, this is when we see one of the fragments of the crystal get sucked towards a pencil. It's almost like it's attracted to it. And then we see Donatello move his arm over it, and we see that this creates some type of patterns in the air. Donatello says, "Evoke, then revoke," a common saying we've seen the turtles say as they use some of these new mystic techniques the Shredder taught them. Now, it is at this point that the Triceraton girl, Siri, or Regenta Siri, that's hiding out here at the turtle base, interrupts Donatello. He tells her that he's working on something important and that she can't be in there, that the Utroms will eventually find out where she is, and that they need to be ready. Now, as we, the readers, know from the last issue of the main run of the Turtles comics, there is a fox in the henhouse already. Anyways, Siri leaves the room and goes to where Carmen and the little pink turtle, Lita, are welcoming the new group that Jennika dropped off. Carmen says that they're on lockdown now, that no one is getting in or out since the Utroms are now in town. Sari says hi to everybody, and when Jeff, the Utrom disguised as a mutant fox, sees her, his eye begins to glow. He asks Siri for the bathroom, and Siri begins to show him the way. When they leave, Lita, the little pink turtle, says that he smells funny, and this causes Carmen to get up and go follow them. Now, we do see before Carmen catches up that he was about to kill Siri while she wasn't paying attention, but luckily Carmen catches up before he's able to do so, and he plays it off, so still nobody suspects anything. Siri and Carmen drop him off at the restroom and go back to where everyone's at. It's here where it jumps to Jeff as he's in the restroom, sending coordinates to the rest of the Utroms, who, as we know, are in Mutant Town, disguised as more mutants. Now, it's at this point in the story that it cuts back over to Jennika, who appears to have not stayed at the base with everyone else and is still out trying to patrol the streets of Mutant Town. And we say trying because, if you remember, Mutant Town is in absolute chaos. The fabric of their society is falling apart ever since the Ninja Turtle clones, who some believe are the actual Ninja Turtles, attacked Baxter Stockman and the TCRI building. Now out here, Jennika appears to be protecting some citizens and has her hands full. Things seem to be going south when out of nowhere, ninja stars fly in and hits one of the guys that she's fighting off. We see that it's Alopex, who has been missing for a good while now. I believe ever since the Turtles began training with the Shredder. For those who may not know, she didn't like that, and this caused her to leave the group. But now we see that she's back, and she helps Jennika fight the bad guys. They mention the Shredder thing briefly, but Alopex says she doesn't want to hear about it. Now the story jumps back over to Donatello, who's back in his lab, trying to work out where the crystals draw their energy from. Now the crystal that got stuck onto the pencil catches his attention. He picks it up and begins to write his name with it on a pad, but the words come off of the page and manifest themselves into real life. Now this is a cool throwback to the old original black and white Mirage Ninja Turtles comics, where Donatello meets a guy named Kirby with a pencil with similar powers. But yeah, anyways, Donatello is amazed at what he's seeing here. He begins to draw more with the pencil, and he ends up drawing what look like patterns and ancient writings that almost make this Doctor Strange-like projection that Donatello here holds. He exclaims, "Yes, space and time," and he looks super excited here. So it looks like Donatello is about to tap into something massive that's going to help out him and his team. When all of a sudden, someone starts speaking on the broadcast system, and this catches Donatello's attention. It's one of the mutant clones, and he shows Man Ray. You see that Man Ray is in a cage here. I believe he's been in there for a while now. The Turtles and Sally, who's in charge of Mutant Town, put him in there because he was a danger, and I think they were gonna figure out some type of judicial system for dealing with that, but I don't believe they ever got around to it with all the chaos that's been going on. The Turtle clone says, "Listen up, Mutant Town. This here is the first hero of the mutant uprising, Man Ray, our fellow mutanimal. We're here to release him from his unjust imprisonment. Mutanimals rule." Now, just a reminder again for some, a lot of people think these are the actual Ninja Turtles. Anyways, we can also see Sally is here next to Man Ray, and she's in another cage. And when Donatello sees this, he freaks out and calls Jennika and tells her to get to City Hall immediately, that the Turtle clones have Sally. Jennika and Alopex make a run for it. Donatello here begins to draw again with the magic pencil, repeating the words in a row, and then he says the control of space and time, as we see a way bigger version of the thing that he had drawn before. This time it's floating above him, and he looks up at it with a big smile on his face. Don appears to have made a breakthrough. To what? We'll have to wait and find out. It cuts over to City Hall, and Jennika and Alopex have arrived. You see that there's a crowd of people outside. Now Jenny and Alopex sneak in and they can see the turtle clones standing by the cages with the two prisoners. The turtle clones are still broadcasting when suddenly Jennika and Alopex attack. The clones immediately yell, fall back, and retreat, and this is when the turtle clones enter into a room where coincidentally Raphael and Old Hob are just arriving. So yeah, it looks like Raphael is back in town and he's brought Old Hob with him. But as soon as Alopex sees this, she becomes upset. For those who don't know, she's in a relationship with Raphael and she yells at him. First Shredder, now Hob. She doesn't like that he's working with him. Unfortunate, as we, the reader, know these alliances are being made because of how big the threat from the Rat King is. But Alopex doesn't know this, and so she takes off. We see her sometime after this alone on a rooftop saying, "I'm done with all of this." The story cuts back over to the turtle base where Donatello is. Everyone who's hiding out here are now gathered playing video games. When Pepperoni, the turtles' little pet, runs off, Sari goes after Pepperoni, and we see that Jeff, the Utrom in disguise, follows her. Once he has her alone, he grabs her by the neck and begins to choke her. Pepperoni jumps on his back and tries to bite him, but he bites Pepperoni and launches her across the room. The commotion gets the attention of the others and they rush in. They tell Lita, the little pink turtle, to go get Donatello, and the rest of the group jump onto Jeff in an attempt to stop him. It jumps over to Donatello, who's on a call with Angel, who says she has an Utrom problem when Lita comes in and tells him about what's happening in the other room. So we'll see what Angel's talking about here, probably in a future issue. But here Donnie rushes off to see what's going on with Sari. He yells at the Utrom and points his new gauntlet invention at him. Just as he's about to fire, we see that it malfunctions. This is when the robotic face of the Utrom opens its fox mouth and blasts Donatello across the room with a giant laser. As everyone watches in horror, Donatello begins to get up, wondering what went wrong with his gauntlet, and this is when he gets ready to fight Old School with just his bow. The two charge at each other, with Donatello getting the best of the Utrom, ripping off the Utrom's mechanical hands and knocking him to the ground. The robotic fox body lays there and Donnie gets close to inspect it. Then without warning, the fur all around the robotic body falls off and the abdomen begins to open up and an Utrom with razor sharp teeth comes out flying at Donatello's face. This is where the book ends though. Issue 4 begins with an interlude set in the Thin Places, a pocket dimension within our world that only the Rat King's family, known as the Pantheon, appear to be able to access. The Rat King's siblings are gathered here, but Rat King is not there. They're all discussing the Rat King's Armageddon game and his willingness to do anything to win, even if it means destroying most of the Earth and reducing what remains into a primitive state. One of the Rat King's siblings, Manmouth, asks if the Rat King possesses the ability to carry out such a plan. Another one of the siblings, Aka, responds that the Rat King's pawns, the so-called trio of terror, Krang, Baxter Stockman, and Madame Null, do have the ability to do so. Now, for those who don't know and are just jumping in, the Pantheon, or the Rat King's family, has a rule against directly intervening in this game, even the Rat King, which is why he has his trio of terror, the three villains we just mentioned, as allies. But, just like the Rat King, the rest of the Pantheon here can use proxies as well in this game, which is where the Turtles and their allies come in. Another one of the siblings here, Jaguar, expresses her hope that the Turtles will prevail, but also acknowledges that if they fail, the time may come to break the rules, although she notes that none of them have ever been able to restrain the Rat King's chaos. I believe this alludes to some time long ago, before they had these rules set in place, where something must have happened where they weren't able to control Rat King. Anyways, she says the only one that has an idea of how to stop him, if it were to come to that, is currently sleeping, and then the scene ends with a glimpse of Kitsune, another one of the Pantheon siblings, and Shredder's love interest in the story, by the way, for those that are new. Anyways, yeah, we see her sleeping here. She is recovering from events that took place before the Armageddon game began, so hopefully she can wake up soon and help out everyone save the world. We jump over to Dimension Z, where Cuddly, the interdimensional cow, is dropping off Leonardo and Shredder on an alien planet to find Cherube, the character that we spoke of in a previous review that possesses the Turnstone, a powerful weapon that they will need to defeat the Rat King. Now she finds them as soon as they arrive and says that Cuddly spoke to her telepathically before they arrived, and so she knew they were coming. She does offer to help back on Earth, but warns that they won't be able to defeat Madame Null one of the Rat King's allies that we spoke of earlier, unless they defeat Madame Null's cousin, Noi Tidar, first there on that alien planet. Cherubei explains that Noi Tidar is holding Cherubei's brethren there captive on this alien planet, and we do get a scene of them later on, and you can see that they are captured and being tortured. She urges Shredder and Leonardo to follow her while they still have the cover of darkness, and Shredder agrees. She says get ready for a long hard climb, and then for a long hard fight afterwards. Shortly after, we see that Shredder and Leonardo are climbing up the side of a mountain. Cherubei gives a history lesson on her brethren as the two climb up. She says that she is the caretaker for the star of Omphalos, haven center to the pristine Eden worlds, which in turn are the homes to the 4 source entities, also called the 4 winds. These 4 winds are her mystical brethren that she spoke of earlier that they're there to liberate. It's interesting, you kind of see some parallels here to the Pantheon family when looking at this group. They also seem to be these divine beings. Anyways, Cherubei continues, now explaining the Turnstone, saying that it's a mysterious artifact of unknown origin, capable of turning wrong into right, dark into light, but that it'll only work if her brethren are returned to their Eden homes. So yeah, this whole part here is a little bit complex, a little bit mystical, but yeah, pretty much they need to free the beings called the 4 winds that are currently being held captive in order to use that Turnstone weapon later on in their fight against Madame Null and the Rat King and all of them. Anyway, she says once that they're all returned to their Eden homes, that only then will she possess the ability to wield the stone. She also mentions that certain destruction awaits to anyone else who tries, so it looks like nobody else can use this thing, that it's a great power to be only used responsibly and sparingly. Leonardo comments here that it sounds a little bit like the new mystic abilities that he and his brothers have just recently learned from the Shredder, the part about using them responsibly and sparingly. Cherubei says that despite it being dangerous, Madame Null still wants the Turnstone. Cherubei also says that she fears it's only a matter of time before this happens, and that that's why they're there, to fight the next battle and stop Madame Null and her cousin from their scheme for multidimensional terror. And this is when we see that Leonardo and Shredder have made it to the top of the climb. They have arrived. Shredder says that he has a plan, and it cuts over to a little while after. Here we see Cherubei calling out Madame Null's cousin, Noi Tidar, at his gates. You see him come out and the two get into a fierce battle. We see that this is all part of Shredder's plan to divert the enemy's attention. Meanwhile, we see that Shredder and Leonardo will sneak into the prison through drainage tunnels, to where Leonardo remarks, different dimension, same nasty stench, which was pretty funny. As they sneak in, we see that they arrive to where Cherubei's brethren are being held, or the 4 winds. But now Shredder and Leo are so deep into the facility, where there's so many guards, that Shredder tells Leonardo that stealth is no longer an option, that it's time for him to embrace the dark. And here we see Leo say, "Yes, master," which I don't know if we've seen him call him that yet, but it was pretty striking to me. Anyways, we see Leo turn into Dark Leo, using his new mystic skills, and then the two strike. Shredder tells Leo to cut down everything in his path, talking about the guards. We see that Shredder has to get to a console, and he is able to, and they do release the 4 winds, and they all head out and see that Cherubei's fight with Noi Tidar has taken a turn for the worse. Cherubei is being grabbed by her head, and it looks like it's going to be crushed. But Shredder calls out, "Turn around, you pathetic hellspawn. The time has come to meet your true master." And we see that Shredder and Leo are standing with the 4 winds ready to fight, but that is where this part cuts off. Next, we jump over and take a look at what's happening in Mutant Town. We actually jump into a situation we were discussing on our last Armageddon Game review, only this time we're seeing it from Raphael's point of view. We see that he's just arriving back into town with Old Hob. He had left before the chaos started there in town, so now that he's back, he's confused at what's going on. You see a news report on a television nearby, and Raph and Old Hob stop by to listen. We have the Ninja Turtle clones here, broadcasting to the city, as we saw in our last review. They have the mayor of Mutant Town, Sally, in a cage, and they're releasing Man Ray, who had been imprisoned by Sally before the Armageddon game began. The Turtle clones, who are posing as the regular Ninja Turtles, pretty much say what they said in the last issue we covered, that Man Ray was the first hero of the mutant uprising, and that everyone should join them and lead the mutanimals to power. Now, one thing worth mentioning here before we keep going is that on this part, we see that Baxter Stockman's hired security is on a nearby rooftop. They can see Raph and Old Hob listening to the broadcast down below, but they find this odd, as they think the Ninja Turtles are currently broadcasting live from inside City Hall. How could Raph be in 2 places at once? One of the guys says that Detective Lewis was right, You see, in an earlier issue, Detective Lewis, a friend of the Turtles, knew when she saw the turtle clones that they weren't the real Ninja Turtles. Anyways, this cuts off here and we see what's happening in Town Hall. Here we see Jennika and Alopex jump in and start breaking up the turtle clones broadcast like we saw in the last Armageddon Game installment. The turtle clones retreat and run into a room where Raph is now entered. Raph asks them, "Where do you think you're going?" Real quick, here we see Alopex leave like we saw in the last issue as well. If you remember, she was upset that Raphael is now partnering up with Old Hob. Anyways, Raphael and Jennika have the Ninja Turtle clones blocked on both sides. Although Jenny tells Raph that she's getting a call from Donatello about trouble at their home. Raphael tells her to go help Donatello, that he's got these wimpy wannabes. We also see here that Old Hob is going to help as well, but not before telling the little weasel mutant kids that follow him to go unlock Man Ray and Sally, although he specifically says to unlock Man Ray first, which I found pretty interesting. The fight begins with Raphael striking first, sending the clones falling back. The clones throw a smoke bomb and retreat into the jail part of the building. Hob and Raphael chase after them, and the fight continues there. Hob and Raph are winning the fight, but we see that two of the turtle clones plan to jump Hob when he's not looking. But this is when they realize that Man Ray is no longer in his cage. Man Ray jumps into the air and starts shooting at the turtle clones, and we see green liquid start coming out of them as they get hit. And as this is happening, one of them begins to display a human arm. Now, one thing we didn't mention that I think is worth mentioning now is that when Sally and Man Ray were locked up, you saw Man Ray say something to Sally that he knows who those turtle fraudsters are, and that so does she. She had no idea who he was talking about, but we find out shortly here soon. Anyways, back to the fight. Yes, one of the turtle clones gets blasted by Man Ray and his arm begins to turn human. We see that eventually as the fight goes on, he turns full human. One of the turtle clones notices and says we're compromised. Abort mission. This time he throws a live grenade on the ground and everyone heads for cover. The grenade explodes as the turtle clones jump out of the building and get away. Now, this whole time that this is happening, Baxter's hired security team that's watching from a nearby rooftop sees what happened, and they also see that one of the clones is now human. We'll see how they react to this and if this causes them to turn on Baxter Stockman. The whole reason everyone is so riled up about everything is because they think that the mutants are gonna attack and take over the humans. But those turtle clones, who have been behind a lot of the attacks, are clearly human. We go back into the building now that the dust has settled. Raphael says he must be going crazy because he saw one of those turtle clones turn human. Man Ray and Sally tell Raph that he's not going crazy, that the turtle clones are a group called the Gang of Four. For those who don't know, this is a group of mercenaries that work for Madame Knoll. They have appeared in this continuity of the Turtles a while back in the Ninja Turtles universe comics. This Gang of Four have cybernetic enhancements that allow them to control the amount of mutagen that they have inside them. This allows them to shift between mutant and human form at will. We'll see what comes of all this, but this is where this part ends. Now we head into the end of the book, and this takes place at the Earth Protection Force Command Facility, a place where we've seen the Rat King and his team meet up before. And here they meet up again, and Baxter Stockman is livid. He is going off on the Gang of Four, or the Copycat Turtles, although now all four are in their human form. He turns his attention to Madame Knoll and yells, "Where did you find these four idiots?" Madame Knoll tells him she doesn't like his tone, but he tells her that he doesn't like how their operation almost got exposed, that he's just convinced the director of the Earth Protection Force to initiate preparations for martial law in Mutant Town, and that they almost blew it. This is when one of the Gang of Four starts to talk back to Stockman, saying it's easy to complain when he's not out there fighting with literal sticks. It starts getting heated when suddenly the Rat King steps in and calms down the situation. He tells them a little chaos is to be expected, but that despite their troubles, everything is still swaying in their favor. The world is starting to think that mutants are a menace, and that Baxter is standing bravely to protect humanity. Their plan is working. That when the mutant terror sweeps beyond the borders of the city, the nation will turn to Baxter and ask him to do whatever it takes to defend everyone. Rat King then addresses the Gang of Four. He tells them that he sees no reason why they shouldn't be able to expand their arsenal moving forward, upping the threat, so pretty much it sounds like he's going to start giving them more lethal weapons. Then the Rat King says, speaking of weapons, it's time for Krang to make his move. And we see that he has been installed inside of Metalhead's body. Krang says it's about blasted time, and we see him blast off. It looks like he is headed to retrieve the Technodrome, no doubt to use as a weapon in this Armageddon game. Now, as we know, the Technodrome is on Burno Island, and Chirel, the other evil Utrom, is there. There will definitely be a face-off here between the two Utroms, judging by the cover of the next issue, so stay tuned. But that's it. That's where this book ends. The issue picks up from the moment where Alopex leaves Raphael earlier in the story, when she gets upset with him. We see that she goes off on her own, and she says that she's done with the Splinter Clan, done with family, except one, Angel, who the last time we saw was being attacked by Utrom assassins in robot mutant bodies. Now it appeared that they had left her alone once they figured out that the Triceratops Siri, or Regenta, wasn't there. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it when we covered that issue, but Angel had blasted one of them before they left, and it appears to not have died, and now is after her within her own building. And now, unfortunately, the Earth Protection Force have also arrived and are outside of Angel's building. They believe that there are 2 mutants in there, and their orders are to move in, and if they see anything move, take it down. So yeah, now Angel is about to be in double trouble. She has her hands full with the Utrom inside, and now the EPF is about to move on in and likely eliminate her. But luckily, it was at this point where Alopex was going over to see Angel. We see that she spots the EPF soldiers as they get ready to move in. She's able to take them all out, although we do see one of the soldiers radio in that they're being attacked by a dog-looking thing, talking about Alopex. We see who they're radioing into. It's a character named Agent Ravenwood. She's a human, but it's important to mention she's a failed mutant experiment from many years ago and does have some abilities. By the way, while all this is going on, Angel is getting hurt really bad inside with her fight against the Utrom. So yeah, it's going down inside the building with Angel and outside the building with Alopex as well. Eventually, Alopex is finished with the soldiers, and it seems like she's finally going to go into the building, but not so fast. A helicopter then approaches, and we see the one that's in charge of the EPF soldiers, Special Agent Ravenwood, is on the helicopter. She's pissed, and she jumps down to confront Alopex. A fight begins, and we see that Alopex is getting beaten badly by Ravenwood. Ravenwood, whose arm now has mutated into tentacles, winds up for a big strike to finish Alopex, but just as she's about to land it, we see that Angel has beaten the Utrom inside and has made it outside just in time, and we see that she stops the blow using her gauntlet that's a part of her suit, and she uses the gauntlet to shock Ravenwood with electricity. This causes Raven's tentacles to sort of become paralyzed, and they're unable to reform back into a regular arm. At first she's taken back, but then she demands them to surrender, but Angel points out that Ravenwood can't even move her arm, and that all her soldiers have fallen. Alopex and Angel begin to walk away, and Ravenwood says she just wanted to give Alopex shelter and the care that she needs, although I don't know if there's any truth to that. Anyways, Alopex says that she can make her own way home from now on, and then we see her and Angel leave. Sometime after this, we see that Alopex and Angel are walking in an alley, discussing how things are going from bad to worse in the Rat King's Armageddon game. Angel tells Alopex that the Turtles, Shredder, and the rest could really use her, Alopex's help, but Alopex doesn't like the idea of working with the Shredder and says it would take a miracle for her to work with the Foot Clan. Then suddenly, Angel says, what are they doing here? And we see that Karai is there with Bebop and Rocksteady. Alopex thinks they're there for a fight and gets ready to attack. Bebop and Rocksteady antagonize her a bit, but Karai tells them to stop. Karai then tells Alopex that she's not there to fight her, that they've come to ask for help. Alopex tells Karai that she, Alopex, doesn't need the Foot Clan in her pack. Karai tells her that she plans to change the Foot Clan and that she would rather be allies with Alopex rather than enemies, but then she also sneaks in a slight dig and says foxes aren't pack animals. This seems to set Alopex off, and she yells at Karai that she's just as high and mighty as the Shredder, that maybe she wants to be him. And then Alopex says, you'll need a scar to complete the look, and then she takes a swipe at Karai, slicing her face. Things get really tense here as Bebop and Rocksteady are about to jump in and attack Alopex, but Karai tells them to back off. Then she says a new threat arises, and that much is at stake, that she truly needs Alopex's help. Alopex is taken back by this. She for sure thought that Karai would have retaliated for what just happened. Alopex then looks over at Angel, pretty much asking her, what should I do? Angel looks back at her and says, I'll be right beside you. Alopex then agrees to help Karai. And yeah, that's where this book ends. So the story starts off where we had last left off with Donatello. He's getting attacked by an Utrom. It's latched to his face, and it appears to be trying to force itself into Donatello's mouth. So yeah, probably trying to take over his body. Siri and Carmen try to pull it off, but it's too strong. We suddenly hear Jenica say, out of the way, as she comes in and stabs the Utrom with her claw weapons. The Utrom appears to still be alive, but then Siri says not for long. For the herd, and then she stomps on it. Everything settles down now as as Donatello thanks Jennika. Donnie tells everyone that the last time he had spoke with Angel, that Angel said that there was at least 5 of these guys, and that he needs to go contact her. But then, suddenly, he remembers to ask Jennika if she relocked the hatch to the bunker after she came in. It's in this moment where we see the rest of the Utroms, disguised as mutants, come storming in. They set their eyes on Siri, but Don orders everyone to the sewer access and to barricade themselves there, and to not let anyone in. Donatello and Jennika stay back and fight the Utroms. After a good minute, they realize that their weapons aren't having an effect on the Utrom exoskeletons, and so they end up retreating and set up another barricade just outside of the sewer access point where their friends are. Donnie yells at them through the door to wait 5 minutes, and that if they don't show up, that they should escape through the water. Siri says no, that they must confront her enemies. We jump back over to Donatello and Jennika's side of the door, and Jennika asks Donnie about the gauntlet, but Donatello tells her that it doesn't work, that he doesn't know what's up with it, that he infused it with magic, and that it was supposed to be a workaround so he could harness Kuji-Kiri, the type of magic that Shredder taught them, even if there are witnesses, but that he doesn't know what the magic might do to the Utroms witnessing it, that it could make things worse. Anyways, Jennika says, screw the witness thing, that they're gonna get killed if he doesn't use it, to save the day now and figure out the rest later. At that moment, Siri comes over to their side. Donatello tells her to stay back, but it's too late. The Utroms begin to fire their laser blasts. Donatello braces with his gauntlet, and he says, Retsu, space and time. And then we see a ball of green energy hit the laser blast. The blast then grows and then collapses, and we see that the Utroms have disappeared, and everything that green blast touched vanished as well and left like a round crater, kind of how like when the Terminator shows up in those earlier Terminator movies. We see that a little bit of the green energy from the blast ends up going into Siri's eyes. We see that Carmen and Jay were also watching from behind the door, and that the green energy went into their eyes as well. It's hard to tell if it also goes into Jennika's, but yeah, nevertheless, it appears that everybody is frozen. Dawn walks around, checking up on everyone, but they're all just standing still. Donatello says, what did I do? This must be what he was saying earlier in the beginning, before he used the magic from the gauntlet. He didn't know exactly what would happen, but now we're seeing it. Suddenly though, Donatello's arm starts getting sucked into the collapsed energy ball that's still there in the center of the room where the blast happened. His arm starts to distort, and he gets pulled into this green energy. This freaks him out, and he begins to yell, stop, stop, but then gets pulled all the way in. Now he's in like this vortex of energy. Dawn can see what's happening inside, and you see that the Utroms are getting sucked into what looks like the mouth of a giant robot shark. Next it cuts over to Carmen, and she appears to be going through something similar as well. She appears to be in the future, and it looks like she's there with Bob, this baboon character that we've seen before with Leonardo. I think it was like in a dream or something where we saw him. Anyways, Carmen knows what's gonna happen next. It's almost like she's been here before. She turns around, and we see that same robotic shark head appears to then swallow her. But as soon as it does this, it's almost like the reality that they're in gets turned into a void. But yeah, that's that for this part of the story. We then end up moving on over to Burno Island. At Burno Island, we see that Chirel is reviewing the footage of Donatello using the gauntlet. So yeah, it looks like he was monitoring the Utroms that he sent out to get Siri. He yells, why didn't we know that these turtles would have some kind of quantum energy abilities? In this scene, by the way, in the background, we can see that the Utroms are being implanted into Triceraton abdomens. Chirel yells that it's time to assemble an assault force and prep the new host. And yeah, it looks like he's talking about those Utrom-controlled Triceratons. He continues and says, we'll go to New York City and terminate Regenta, aka Siri, ourselves. But then you see one of the other Utroms tell Chirel that there's something he should see. You see that their radar has an incoming bogey, made of both organic and inorganic components. Chirel says it's him. He calls the others and says we'll meet our visitor with full force. We see that it's Krang. He's arrived. And just like we saw the last time we saw him, he's in Metalhead's body. The two have not seen each other in a while, since Krang's trial where Leatherhead ended up eating him, I believe. This happened way before the events of the Armageddon game. Anyways, Krang yells out for Chirel, and Chirel comes out to confront him. But Chirel has backup, and you can see that now Chirel and his group are all using Triceraton bodies as hosts. Krang begins to ridicule their new host bodies, but Chirel doesn't back down, and says that Krang is just jealous that he never thought of the idea. Crain tells Cherel to shut his mouth and to call off his forces, that there are bigger plans in motion and that he's in charge here. But Cherel says, not anymore, Crain. Crain yells at the soldiers to stand down, but you see that they no longer take orders from Crain and only listen to Cherel. Crain tells Cherel that Cherel did always put his self-destructive pride before the greater picture, just like Crain's own father. Cherel then tells Crain, say what you will about your own father, but he was right about you. You have never been a true leader to the Utrom people, and you never will be. The two then begin to fight, but this is where the issue ends. This one picks up at what looks like around the time where Donatello got sucked into that energy ball that he created with the gauntlet. We had talked about that in the previous breakdown. Now we see that he gets transported into a lab of sorts. Although he appears to have time traveled, you see him say, where, when am I? But then he hears somebody coming, so he goes ahead and hides behind a bookshelf. We hear a voice, and it says, here we go, one last time, before my memory is wiped of all of it. And we see that it's an older Donatello, like really old. You can tell many years have passed. We see that he still has the magic crystal attached to the pencil that we saw our regular Donatello messing with in our current timeline. Regular Donatello from our timeline is watching and he is stunned. He's seeing an older version of himself. Old Donatello then begins to draw with the crystal, like right in the air in front of him. And we see that he draws the rest of the turtles, April and Splinter. He begins to talk to them. He tells them, hey guys, I know things were never the same after the Armageddon game. Why couldn't we have just talked to one another? And then Armagon. Nobody believed me until it was too late. Alright, so real quick, that's pretty massive, just the mention of Armagon. Although we believe we have seen glimpses of him as this like giant shark creature thing, I don't think we've actually ever heard him called by his name. So there you go, that big mechanical shark thing does appear to be Armagon. Now just by the looks of things, it does look like he does something to the turtles at some point in time where Donatello is the only one left, at least by the looks of this future that they're in right now. So yeah, interesting. Old Donatello continues. He says, I tried while you guys all did nothing. You left me. And then we see tears begin to come out of old Donatello's eyes. The story then takes us back over to the present, and we're now with Venus, and she's with Bludgeon. It's been a while since we've seen them, and they seem to still be having Venus hide out in the lower basement levels of the Foot Clan headquarters. Venus says at this point that she feels Donatello pulling her, and asks Bludgeon if that makes sense. Bludgeon says the turtles do have that kind of effect, that they're powerful entities that draw people to their orbit for good or ill. Venus then says that maybe that's what she's afraid of, that when she was around Donatello, she felt his presence, his identity was clouding her own, what little there is of it. Now, as we mentioned before, Venus was like put together like a Frankenstein's monster, so yeah, she's dealing with a lot, with like who she is and all her old memories and stuff. Bludgeon then tells her that her, Venus, is still forming her new sense of self, that she's very fragile, too vulnerable to be around the strong spirits of the turtles, that she doesn't belong anywhere yet, but that she will. Then Bludgeon says that he feels somewhat the same, a similar disconnection, but in his own unique situation with the Foot Clan, and that he doesn't know what to do either. Now, while the two are having this discussion, all of a sudden, Koya comes bursting in. Now, a quick refresher, Koya is like Bludgeon's partner in crime, so to speak. Anyways, Koya is heated. She didn't know about Venus's presence here. She yells at Bludgeon, asking why he's been hiding from her, and that who is this intruder. Now, right as things seem like they're about to escalate, something starts happening. Venus grabs Bludgeon's hand and says, what is this? And then we see a portal start opening up, and it pulls Venus and Bludgeon into it. And then you hear Venus say, it's Donatello. He did something. We cut back over to old Donatello in the future, and he appears to still be yelling at the drawings of his family, but this time we see green energy coming from his eyes. He tells the drawings of his family that he did everything, so goodbye. It's time to forget. We then see the image of his family begin to fade away. Then he starts speaking in some language that we don't understand. A green energy starts to form around old Donatello, and he begins to levitate. He then begins to float away as he goes out of a window and off into the distance. We cut over to regular Donatello. He's getting teary-eyed watching all this happen. He says to himself to get it together, that this is just one possible future, that nothing is set in stone. We move back over to Venus and Bludgeon. They also appear to now be in the future, and are watching from a distance a group of mutants and one human training with some type of mystic ability, and leading the training session is the future version of Venus, and she looks a little different than present day Venus. All of her scars and stitching from her procedure that originally put her together are gone. Present day Venus comments that she looks whole. You can see that there's a future version of Bludgeon there as well. Now meanwhile, while all this is going on, you can see that present day Donatello starts going through future Donatello's journals. He's trying to figure out how to get back home. He stumbles on something called QNA, a temporal component of DNA. Then he starts talking about a dimensional manifold existing outside of time, yet inside of us. Then he says that the flow of time is like water, that it must take a lot of energy to go against that current. He starts to get overwhelmed and says, how will I ever be able to understand all this? But he does know that Q&A is the key. If he can figure it out, he can stop the Armageddon game from destroying everybody. Then he finds a note from old Donatello, and it's addressed to him, present day Donatello. So yeah, old Donatello knew that present day Donatello would be here. The note says, Dawn, life is at best bittersweet. Signed, Dawn. We jump back over to outside, where future Venus is doing her training session with the others. Future Donatello arrives, and future Venus tells him that the students aren't ready, but future Donatello tells her that they have to be, that they have no choice. You can see present day Venus, who's watching from a distance, is getting upset that future Donatello won't let future Venus complete her training, but then present day Bludgeon tells her to look up. We see that in the sky, a portal made out of shark teeth starts opening up. We see a giant shark head begin to emerge from the portal and hovering over the future group. Present day Venus says we can help and begins to run towards them. Future Bludgeon notices this out of the corner of his eye and stops her. He says to present day Venus that she can't, that she must leave, that the thing called Armageddon will always come for us, and that if present day Venus dies there in the future, that none of this will exist, that she must live. During all of this, we see that the giant shark head Armageddon is starting to eat their reality. Everything is getting sucked into its mouth. Future Venus notices present day Venus as future Venus starts getting sucked into the shark's mouth. Future Venus then tells present day Venus to grab her hand. She tells her this is why we're here, and we see what appears to be some type of DNA exchange through their fingers. Future Venus says, myself is yourself. This already happened to us with me in your place. That she remembers coming to this place when she was in her shoes. That she was waiting for herself, past, present, and future simultaneously existing within them. Present day Venus says, I remember everything I've done, things I haven't learned yet. And we see present day Venus start taking the appearance of future Venus. All her scars start to disappear. Future Venus then gets pulled away and pulled apart as she starts getting pulled more into the shark's mouth. Then suddenly present day Donatello, who realized what was happening outside, shows up. He reaches out and grabs present day Venus's hand, who is now also getting pulled into the shark's mouth. Here the two of them have some kind of mind meld. We see both their memories start blending. We see the memory of when Bebop and Rocksteady almost killed Donatello back in the early days of these IDW comics. You can see when they smashed his shell with the sledgehammer. Then you see what happened to that damaged shell after it was replaced by the artificial shell that Donatello currently has. The damaged shell got disposed of after the surgery, but then we see some type of mutant scavenger found it and eventually brought it to Dr. Barlow, the doctor that created Venus. And you see what appears to be that damaged shell used as the shell for Venus when she was made. So yeah, this explains why she's always had an unexplained connection to Donatello. Donatello says, I think I understand now. This is what Q&A is. Memories, knowledge, emotions, selves, everything. It's the force needed to push us through time. That time is infinite, so Q&A must contain infinite energy, which can be transferred or even transformed. Venus then says, I know who you are, Donatello, and who I am too, and who I will be. Suddenly we see a portal start opening up, like the one that brought them here to the future. Present day Donatello, present day Venus, and present day Bludgeon get sucked into it, and we see that this happens just in time before Armageddon would have chomped down on them. We jump back over to the present in the basement of the Foot Clan headquarters, and it seems that here in the present, only a mere couple seconds have gone by, as Koya is still just entering the room. Koya is shocked at what she just saw with the portal, and says, what just happened? Bludgeon tells her that he has a lot to tell her, that it's time to build their own ninja clan. Venus looks at Donatello and says, you're not going to try to persuade me to go back with you again? Donatello starts walking back into the portal and says, no, we know where to find each other, and then he leaves. Sometime after this, we see that Bludgeon and Venus are now out of the Foot Clan headquarters. They are on Roosevelt Island, at a garden, which appears to be abandoned. Anyways, you can see Venus telling Bludgeon that this is the place, that this place is amazing, and that she wishes Bludgeon could see it. Venus must be seeing what this place will become in the future. Bludgeon says he can feel it, that it feels like home, and that he may never be able to repay Donatello for finding this place. You then hear a voice say, yes, the turtle has excellent taste, and we see that it's Karai. Venus yells no and braces for a fight. Bludgeon tells Venus that she could get hurt. Koya then swoops in and pushes Venus back, and Venus falls. She tells Venus it's not a good idea to attack a visitor before you know what they can do, but that good thing that Karai is not here to fight. Venus says she doesn't believe that she can feel the darkness in her soul. Karai then helps Venus get up and tells her she didn't come to fight, that she came to prepare for a fight and that she needs their help. Bludgeon says that he's tired of fighting, that his goal is to find peace now. Karai then says that she seeks to win the Pantheon's game, that taking out the turtle imposters is the first thing she needs Bludgeon to do. But Bludgeon says no, that he will never find peace if he stays with the Foot Clan. Koya gets in Bludgeon's face and says, you're abandoning me? I need you. Bludgeon tells Koya that he could never abandon her, but that he will have to turn his back on the war Karai wants to wage. Koya can't believe what she's hearing, but Karai grabs her arm and tells Bludgeon that they respect his choice. They begin to walk away, and you hear Karai tell them to remember that only the past is set in stone, but that they can never be sure about the future. Venus and Bludgeon begin to talk after Karai leaves. Venus tells Bludgeon that she's glad Karai is gone, that there really was darkness in her, evil. Bludgeon tells Venus that he's sure there's far more darkness in store for Karai, but that for now, that's not their problem. So yeah, we'll see what that's about, but that's where this book ends. Okay, so the Armageddon Game number 5 picks up where issue 136 left off. Krang and Chirel have locked horns. Krang tries to talk down Chirel, telling him that he's sabotaging the Utrom's rise to ultimate power, that his fight isn't with Krang. Chirel launches Krang into a wall and tells Krang he's right. His fight isn't with him, it's with the Triceraton Seri and her filthy mutant allies, so the Turtles and company, and that Krang is just an insect in his way, waiting to be crushed. And he's doing all this as he steps on Krang's back. Krang can be seen saying, so be it, and we see that he pulls a reversal and blasts Chirel with a powerful laser. Chirel goes flying back, but then we cut over to the Utrom lieutenant named Cleve and the Corporal Monturo, who are both watching. The lieutenant says, let them fight, and the battle rages on. Krang yells at Chirel as he begins to win the fight. He says that Chirel is always in a foolhardy rush to conquer, without considering the consequences, that he, Chirel, would drag the Utroms into a military conflict over a single Triceraton brat, when everything they need to rid the world of their enemies is right there on the island they're on. Then he starts talking about the Rat King and the other evil allies that he has. He tells Chirel that he was sent to the island today to restore power to the Technodrome, to retrofit it for the purpose of enslaving and mutating humanity, but that those that sent him are naive like Chirel, that he, Krang, did not bring the Utroms here to share this world with anyone, that he brought them there to create a new home for them, like the one Krang's own father let get destroyed in Dimension X. That's what he constructed the Technodrome for, to terraform this planet into a new Utromenon, and that there's nothing Rat King, Baxter Stockman, Madame Knoll, or the pathetic mutants can do to stop him. And then we see Krang point his laser blaster at Chirel's head, and he says, nor you mutinous scum. Goodbye, Chirel. And just as he's about to blast, we see Lieutenant Cleve shoot Krang in the face. Cleve tells Krang that he's sorry, but that he couldn't allow Krang to kill Chirel, that they waited a long time for Krang to return, to finish what they had originally started when they first arrived on the island, but that when he never showed up, Chirel showed them a new way, a warrior's way. Krang, with his face now half blasted off, says, fool, all of you. Chirel's way only leads to doom. Chirel then spits on Krang and says good riddance. So yeah, it appears Krang is killed here. Chirel tells the rest of his soldiers that now they'll go back to what they were doing, destroying the Regenta cow and her friends, the Turtles. We jump back over to Dimension Z, and we're back where we left off here. Noitaidar has Cherube, Shredder, and Leo, with the Four Winds, stand across from them on a bridge. Noitaidar threatens to crush her throat, but Cherube tells them not to listen to him. Leo says, who's listening, and throws his ninja stars at Noitaidar. The ninja stars find their target, and Cherube breaks free. She joins the group and is relieved to see her brethren, but it's not over yet. They still need to find a way to cross the bridge that they're on. Noitaidar is bleeding from the ninja stars, but he's not down for the count just yet. Leonardo and Shredder tell Cherube to stay with her brethren, and the two leap forward towards Noitaidar. A fight begins. Noitaidar says he knows who they are, that his cousin Noel keeps him informed on what goes on their world. But Leo says, wrong, demon. She's never met me, and that he should introduce himself. And then he slices Noitaidar's chest. Noitaidar then knocks Leo back. He tells Leo, you think you can defeat me in my own dominion? But then Shredder jumps in and says, defeat you? No, we will destroy you. And then both Shredder and Leo start beating the crap out of him. The fight is now over. Leonardo and Shredder have won. Shredder tells Leonardo, finish him, and we see Leonardo wind his sword back, but Noitaidar begins to beg for mercy. Leonardo then puts his sword away and says he's already finished. Shredder tells him mercy is not an option. To become a true master, he must make life and death decisions, just like he, Shredder, always has, and his father Splinter as well. But Leo says, I'm not you, I'm not my father. And then he does his evoke and revoke saying, and he goes from Dark Leonardo back to regular Leonardo. We see Leonardo then tell Cherube to contact Cuddly the cow, that they're ready to go, just as soon as they take care of Noitaidar. And we see that they lock him up in a cell, and this is a cell that serves automated food, so that he won't starve. Leonardo says it's time to head home, and walks off. Noitaidar tells Shredder that Shredder doesn't seem happy, that he doesn't blame him, that how can Shredder expect to master his enemies when he can't even master his own soldier. Shredder tells him he's wrong. Leonardo is not his soldier, and that he is not his master, that Leonardo is his own, and that anyone who believes otherwise is a fool, himself included. This is when we see Cuddly the cow arrive, and everybody starts heading to him. We jump back to Earth, and we see two guys from Baxter's security team, Colonel Knight and Sergeant Winters, watching the Earth Protection Force get ready to enter Mutant Town. You see them say things are going from bad to worse. Colonel Knight says that at least the escalation is only taking place in Mutant Town, but that it's the best way to smoke out the turtle terrorist. Here we see Sergeant Winters begin to question Baxter's call for martial law. Colonel Knight tells him that they aren't getting paid a crapload of money to agree or disagree, that protecting Stockman is their only job. Nearby, you see the head of the Earth Protection Force, Director Bronze, talking with Baxter Stockman. He tells Stockman that his troops are ready to go, that they're just waiting on Stockman to give the green light. Here we see Stockman give the green light as he heads back to City Hall. Colonel Knight escorts Baxter back inside the building, and Sergeant Winters ends up meeting with Detective Lewis outside. The two share a coffee together and discuss some of the suspicions that they have about everything that's going on, specifically about how the turtle clones aren't the real turtles. They're starting to suspect that this is all deliberate, and they're right. We jump over to Raph, who's still at the Mutant Town City Hall. He's trying to call Donatello, but Donatello isn't answering. While Raphael tries to make his call, Man Ray, Sally, and Old Hob are nearby talking. At one point, they discuss what to do with Man Ray, as Sally had locked him up before the events of the Armageddon game had started. But now she says that she has the rest of Mutant Town to think about. So she tells him to help her stop the violence instead of starting it, which is what got him locked up in the first place, by the way. He tells her he'll do his best. Hob says they're one big happy family again. Then they ask where's Raphael. Raph's still trying to get a hold of Donatello with no luck, so he tells the group that he can't help them right now, that he has to get back to the lair, that something's not right. We then jump over to a helicopter from Channel 6 News that's reporting the Earth Protection Force moving towards Mutant Town. We see that it's Vernon Fenwick. I believe this is his debut in the IDW comics. Anyways, he's reporting about what's happening, saying that he can tell from his experience covering the front lines in the Middle East that military doesn't roll out like this unless it means serious business. And just as he says this, a different aircraft comes flying through his helicopter, killing him. It's Chirrell's strike force coming to draw first blood, and they are attacking Mutant Town with airstrikes. Everyone starts freaking out. The humans just outside of Mutant Town, the mutants inside, everyone. Baxter and Madame Null are watching what's going on from their location, and they know that this isn't part of the plan. They know Krang messed something up somehow. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, Raphael starts booking it back to his lair to try to get to Donatello. He gets close and can see the lair as he approaches, but just as he gets there, one of Chirrell's ships blows up the lair. Raphael screams no as this happens and falls to his knees. You could see also at the same time that this is happening, Mikey is arriving with the Nova posse. He's finally back home, but he looks out of the ship's window and sees that it's too late. So yeah, this is the end of the Armageddon Game issue 5. We'll see what happens next. Alright, so issue 137 kicks off, and we seem to be moments before the lair exploded. We're back with Donatello, Jennika, Siri, or Regenta, as she's also known, Carmen, and Jay, who are still underneath, where they're trying to escape from the Utroms. That green energy portal thing is still there in the room, and everyone is still frozen, just like the last time we saw them. Jennika seems to be the first one to snap out of it. She's looking around. She sees that nobody can move, and she sees the green portal. Then suddenly Donatello gets thrown out of the green portal, and she asks him what happened, and he tells her he traveled to the future. She tells him that he froze time there in the present, and that he's got to revoke the magic. He says the revoke saying, and everyone snaps out of it. Everyone celebrates for a minute, but then they hear a large explosion up above from Chirell's troops firing on the lair. They go up to the surface and see that their building has been destroyed. It's on fire. They see the Utroms attacking Mutant Town, and now the Earth Protection Force is attacking the Utroms, even though they were originally going into Mutant Town to crack down on the mutants. So it's just chaos. We jump back over to the lair, and Raphael is digging through the rubble trying to find Donatello. He didn't know he was in the lower levels, so he thinks he died, but then he sees Donatello and is relieved. Siri then approaches them, and Donatello yells at her to get back in the bunker, that it's not safe for her to be up there, but she says no, that Chirell wants her. So she screams to the sky, "Chirell, here I am. Face me, coward." This causes one of the Utrom spaceships to land, and out comes a group of Utroms in Triceraton host bodies. Obviously, this is super upsetting for Siri. Chirell tells Siri to surrender, but Siri yells no, and a big brawl begins with Raphael, Donatello, Jennika, and Siri versus this group of Utroms in Triceraton host bodies. Siri directs her attack at Chirell and knocks off his Triceraton armored mask, but she is then thrown to the floor. She looks up, and what she sees devastates her. The host body Chirell has taken over is her mother's body. She rages out, but gets blasted to the ground by Chirell. The turtles surround her to back her up. Donnie points his gauntlet at the Utroms, but Chirell blasts it. It becomes apparent that the turtles and Siri are outnumbered. Chirell then says that he'll spare the turtles if Donatello will explain the gauntlet technology. Donatello says no way, and so Chirell says, then die. Now, just as Chirell is about to shoot at them, down come the Nova Posse and Michelangelo, who have just arrived. The rest of the turtles are happy to see Mikey, as it's been a while since they've all seen each other, but there's no time, because another brawl breaks out. The fight finishes with Siri ramming Chirell in his host body's abdomen, so Siri thinks she's killed him, since this is where Utroms usually attach themselves to their hosts. But when they look down, they see that there's nothing in the abdomen area, so they conclude Chirell was controlling the body remotely from Burno Island. But nevertheless, the fight is over. The turtles and their allies have won this battle. But Siri begins to cry. Chirell has gotten away. She thought she had him. This is when the Nova Posse ask her if she would like to come with them. Their mission is to get Krang and Chirell, so their goals kind of align. Siri says yes, that they'll destroy them together, but that before they go, her mother and the others must be honored. And then we see them burn the bodies of the Triceraton hosts. Shortly after, we see Siri say goodbye to the turtles, and she boards the Nova Posse's ship to go after Chirell on Burno Island. She says that she'll see everyone again after she's freed her people. We then see her in the ship as she attaches a metal horn to the horn on her nose, and she says, "Chirell, your grave awaits. The Triceraton Regenta is coming for you." But yeah, that's where issue 137 ends. Okay, so next we're jumping into the Armageddon Game, issue number 6. We pick up where the story left off. We see Chirell and he's at Burno Island. He says our enemies will be here soon. He gives a speech to his troops, saying that they will not fall like their disgraced General Crane. The troops stand by, ready for orders. The first order, Chirell sends out a message to the strike force to kill all the mutants in Mutant Town. Lieutenant Cleve asks what about the humans. Chirell says all wars have collateral damage. Then Chirell has his corporal fortify their base there on the island, that if they're gonna come and face Chirell face to face, they're gonna have to earn it the hard way. And finally, he tells his troops to remove Krang's body from the command center, and you see Krang lying there dead. We next jump over back to City Hall. Sergeant Winters and Detective Lewis are seen running into City Hall. They meet up with Colonel Knight. Detective Lewis asks where Stockman is, and Knight tells her he's in his office making a call to Null Industries. So Madame Null. Detective Lewis appears to start connecting the dots and tells Winters what I tell you. We then jump over to Baxter's office, and we see him on a call with Madame Null and the Rat King. Stockman is confused at what he's seeing on television. the Utroms attacking Mutant Town. He says, "Forgive me for my confusion, but I thought the entire point of their team-up was for the subjugation, manufacture, and sale of mutants, not their wholesale slaughter." Madame Null chimes in and says that he is not confused, that slaughter was never a part of the game plan. Then Rat King says his piece and tells them no, but chaos always was, and that chaos begets chaos. That it appears Krang didn't receive the homecoming that he was anticipating. Baxter Stockman wonders how the Rat King would know that Krang isn't spearheading this assault. The Rat King tells him there are many things that he knows, such as there is always opportunity to be found within chaos, that it's simply up to them to identify it and exploit it. Stockman isn't impressed. He says other than the Rat King's commentary, what value does Rat King actually offer? The Rat King responds with that bringing this team together is something he's brought. He also explains his family's long game for the world and the rules that he must follow, that his family, the Pantheon, are the players, but that each player's chosen few are the performers. And then he tells them that they all have performed their parts in exemplary fashion. Madame Null tells him to save the flattery, that she wants to hear specifics on how they should next proceed in this game, because at this rate, the Utroms are going to destroy their prize. The Rat King responds with the answers are obvious, and tells Madame Null to unleash her gang of 4, so the fake turtles, but to let them have this fight on their terms, which the last time we checked, they wanted to have deadlier weapons, so that's probably what that means. They'll be able to bring their weapons of choice this time. He then moves on to Baxter. He tells Baxter that Krang has served up a new terrifying problem with this Utrom attack that's happening, and that now, to get the public even more on his side, Baxter must offer a solution, and that's where we leave off here. We next jump over to Mutant Town. We hear Raphael say, "No way we're going to be able to fight against that." And we see him and the other turtles looking at all the destruction that's happening. Donatello says, crazy as it sounds, the best thing they got going for them is the Earth Protection Force. This is when we jump over to Director Bronze of the Earth Protection Force, and he's screaming for air support. They're getting massacred by the Utroms. The air support comes, and the Utroms in the air focus their attention on the incoming EPF air support, but at the same time, release ground troops to combat the EPF that are fighting on the ground. So yeah, a big battle begins on the ground and in the skies. This is when the turtles jump in and start fighting the Utroms that are on the ground. We jump over to a different part of town where Old Hob, Man Ray, Herman the Crab, and the Weasels are. They are also getting caught up with the Utrom ground troops. At first, they look a bit concerned, but Herman the Crab tells everyone to relax and he starts going wild on the Utroms. He pulls out all the big guns, and we see him annihilate a group of Utroms. They next head over to a secret location that Man Ray has nearby. We see that in this location, he has a truck full of explosives that he was saving for something big. Old Hob is happy to see this. He tells Herman to go back to Mutant Town City Hall and help Mayor Sally, that he, Old Hob, and Man Ray are going to take care of some overdue business at the Mutant Town Wall. So yeah, we'll see where this takes us. We jump back over to the turtles, and they're starting to win the fight against the Utroms. At one point, it seems like they're fighting side by side with the EPF, but this doesn't last long, and the turtles start getting shot at. Now at first, they think it's the EPF that's shooting them, but then we see that it's the fake turtles. And just as we predicted, now they have guns. A fight then begins between the real turtles and the fake turtles. At first, the fight seems to be going okay, but then the guns turn out to be too much for the real turtles. They all lose their ninja weapons and are now at gunpoint. Meanwhile, while this fight is going on, other mutants see what's going on. They say it's those Splinter Turtles that attack Stockman. Then you hear them talking about why is there two groups of turtles, but at the end of the day, these mutants think that all the Ninja Turtles are stupid and have caused the rest of the mutants nothing but trouble. You hear the mutant civilians say they all got to go, and we see them begin to fire their weapons at all the turtles, the fake ones and the real ones. Now it is at this time that Cuddly the Cow appears with Leonardo, Shredder, and Cherube. They have now arrived home, and they jump down to help the good turtles as we see the fake turtles take off. But we'll have to see what happens in the next issue because we cut away from this and are now back on Burno Island. We see there that the Nova Posse and Sari or Regenta have arrived. They decide to split up. One group will go take the fight to Chirel, and the other group will free the remaining imprisoned Triceratons and some of the good Utroms. Commander Ozul of the Nova Posse says that they might know we're already here, but that the Nova Posse still has plenty of surprises up their sleeves. The end of the book cuts over to Krang's body that's still in the metalhead robot that he was using as the host body. Cherel appears to have ordered his troops to throw Krang in the trash, but it's here where we see the metalhead suit start to power up on its own. It begins to run a diagnosis of all systems and indicates that the parasitic element, so Krang, has 0% life functions. So yeah, Krang's dead. But then the suit does like an electric shock on Krang to bring him back to life. When it's done, you hear the metalhead suit say that the parasitic element, Krang, now has 52% life functions. So yeah, he's alive again, but not at 100%. And then we see that his face was scarred, and he's furious. You hear him say about the 52% that it's enough to finish what he started. And that's where this book ends. Alright, so next up is one of the Alliance side story books. This time it's The Alliance issue number 5, and this one seems to focus mostly on April O'Neil and what she's been doing throughout the Armageddon game. We haven't seen much from her yet in this story arc, so it should be pretty interesting to see what she's up to. We see that she's at Knoll Industries, so Madame Knoll's headquarters. She thought the building would be empty, but she was wrong. She ends up getting chased here by Madame Knoll and her mutant lackeys, Krissa the mutant python, and Zodi the mutant scorpion. At one point she stops trying to escape and instead starts working on a way to get her message out while she still can, just in case something happens to her. She's quickly trying to record a message on a computer in one of the offices. She says in the message, 4 days ago, I found out who's been impersonating the Turtles, the so-called Gang of Four. Then she says, all the attacks, all the riots, and mayhem and chaos, it all traced back to Baxter Stockman. She then says that eventually she learned that Baxter Stockman has been secretly aligned with Madame Knoll, and that led her to Madame Knoll's headquarters, and that Madame Knoll plans to turn all of New York into mutants. As she's recording this, we start hearing some voices approaching, saying, human, we're gonna find you. And we also see Madame Knoll, who's back at her desk, beginning to shut down all the elevators, lock all the doors, and also disable the communication systems. That way April can't get her message out. April realizes that her message isn't sending, and she can't stay where she's at because Zodi and Krissa are approaching. April, with nowhere to run, begins to make her way to the rooftop of the building, which Madame Knoll knew would be her next move. So when we see April get up there, Madame Knoll is waiting. Madame Knoll tells her that it's over, she's captured, that next she'll be interrogated, and that April will tell Madame Knoll everything she needs to know, and that also April won't be able to deliver the intel that she's acquired to the Turtles or the public. This is when April says, I already told them that it was tricky hacking through Madame Knoll's communication safeguards, but that everything's already on its way to the outside world. Madame Knoll begins to panic here. She says that she can stop it. April, who's now standing at the edge of the building, looks back at Madame Knoll and says maybe, but that she seriously doubts it. Then April says, either way, my secrets die with me. And then we see April jump off the side of the building. Madame Knoll, who's more concerned with the message getting out into the public, runs back into the building to try to stop the message from sending. Madame Knoll rips off the door to the communications room and sees that Zodi was locked in there. This happened when Madame Knoll locked down the entire building. Zodi tells Madame Knoll that the message actually did fail to send. Madame Knoll begins to realize that April tricked her. Then we cut back to the outside of the building, and we see that April is hanging from the fire escape. She works her way down and retreats to her family's second time around shop, where if you remember, Casey Jones is with April's parents. April collapses into Casey's arms, and we hear her say, call Donatello. A short while after, we see that there's a meeting going on the top of the second time around shop. We see April and Casey are up there, but they're now there with Sergeant Winters and Detective Lewis. We see that they're all waiting up there to have a meeting with Karai. When Karai finally arrives, we see that things are kind of tense between her and April. April seems to feel that Karai really hasn't been doing much to help ever since the Armageddon game began, that she's been busy following her own agenda instead of actually leading the Foot Clan to help the Turtles and their allies. Karai then instructs April to give her $1. Everyone is confused, but Casey ends up giving her the $1. Karai says that now that money has changed hands, that technically April has now hired the Foot. Karai then says that the Foot Clan's participation up until this point has been voluntary, but that now by hiring the Foot Clan, even with just the symbolic wage of $1, the Foot is now honor bound to see this through for the Turtles and their allies. But then Karai also says to April and everyone else to pay attention at what will come next, because they'll all have their part to play, and that it'll be catastrophic to Madame Knoll's plans. So issue 138 of the regular ongoing Ninja Turtles comic series is where the story picks up next. It starts off in Mutant Town, and we see that Old Hob and Man Ray are putting explosives on the Mutant Town wall that separates them from the rest of New York. We see that the Weasels aren't happy about Old Hob working with Man Ray, since he had put them in a cage earlier in the story at some point. So they wander off to go do something, but by the time Old Hob notices, they're gone. So we'll see what they're up to a little later. We next jump over to the Turtles, and just like the last time we saw them, they're in a massive brawl with everybody in sight pretty much. The mutant civilians that don't like them, the Utroms, and now what looks like the Earth Protection Force. So yeah, there's no organization to this battle anymore, it's just chaos. The Turtles start to realize that this is getting too big for them, but they come to the understanding that they just have to bide their time until Sari and the Nova Posse cut the Utrom invasion off at the source. Although you do see the Turtles start to get overwhelmed, but then Sally, Herman the Crab, and some others that were students of Leonardo at one point arrive to help, and the battle rages on. We jump over to Burno Island, and we see that the Nova Posse and Siri begin to enter Shirel's compound. They split up. We see one half of the Nova Posse, who are trying to free the good Utrom prisoners. You can see that they've gotten past the guards and released some of them. The other group, along with Siri, stumble upon what looks like Utrom babies. They discuss what to do with them, but Siri says that the babies are innocents, that her mother tried to hold a truce between the Utroms and the Triceratons, and she wants to honor that. Then we hear a voice yell, "Step away from them," and we see it's Shirel, and his host Triceraton body is massive. He looks like an absolute tank. Sari isn't fazed by this. She tells him it's time we end this, and the two charge towards each other, with the Nova Posse backing up Siri. The fight is intense, with Shirel knocking the Nova Posse back and pinning down Siri at one point. The fight seems to be all but lost, and Shirel begins to crush Siri's head. Shirel begins to taunt her, and says, "What's that thing Triceratons always say? For the pack?" And then you hear Siri say, "No," and you see her detach the metal horn from her nose as she yells, "For the herd," and she stabs Shirel with the metal horn between his eyes. Shirel is killed. The fight is over and Sari begins to get up. Commander Ozul tells her that she still needs to put down Shirel's army in New York, so Sari grabs a hologram transmitter from Shirel's body and begins to broadcast to his troops. She says, "This is Sari, Triceraton Regenta. Surrender now and you will be shown mercy. Your leader is dead," and she shows them all his dead body. Then she tells them to leave now or face the wrath of the Triceratons. We then cut over to the rumble that the Turtles are involved in, and we see that the Utroms actually begin to retreat. Jenica says 1 down, but Raphael says 2 more to go, talking about the angry mutant civilians and the Earth Protection Force. Michelangelo says we're never going to stop this unless we can make everyone see what's really going on. This gives Jenica an idea. She says she needs to use the Kujikiri, her mystical power that she learned, to expose the truth. Leonardo chimes in here and tells her not with all these witnesses around. So yeah, similar like with what Donatello was saying. Anyways, this is when Cuddly the cow comes down and says, "I can help with that," and he opens his mouth, insinuating to Jenica to go in there, that way nobody can see her. Shredder tells her that she'll be perfectly hidden in there, and so Jenica goes in. Inside she starts summoning her magic. And on the outside, we start seeing projections of all the bad guys and what they've been doing. The fighting stops as everyone starts looking around at what's happening. The people start commenting about how suddenly they don't feel mad anymore, and they start asking themselves why they were fighting. The situation is diffused. Jenica did it. The story cuts back over to Man Ray, and he's setting up the bomb inside of the mutant town wall, but what he doesn't know is that the Weasels are secretly following him, and they are out for vengeance on Man Ray. Old Hob, who also appears to be in the wall, but in a different area, radios in to Man Ray, asking him if he's seen the Weasels. Man Ray tells him he hasn't, but that it's time to set off the bomb. Hob tells Man Ray that they can't leave the Weasels behind, but Man Ray says that they might have to, that now that the Utroms have retreated, the Earth Protection Force will soon be making their way, and just as he says this, the Weasels attack him, brutally, clawing and scratching. Then one pulls out a knife and slices Man Ray's throat. Man Ray falls to the ground. And when he does, so does the trigger for the bomb. The bomb becomes activated, and you can hear Old Hob yelling through the radio that why did he hit the trigger already? Old Hob begins to run to try to get clear from the explosion. We cut to outside the wall, and the Turtles, Shredder, Cherube, Cuddly, Sally, and the others all begin to hear a rumble. Leonardo yells at everyone to move. The explosion goes off. We see Old Hob as he runs from the blast is launched into the air and crashes down to the ground. He looks at the rubble and is devastated. Surely the Weasels and Man Ray have died. Raphael sees him and runs up to him along with everyone else. They ask about the Weasels, and Old Hob says that they're gone, that they were in the blast. Raphael puts his arm around them, and old Hob begins to cry. As this is happening, Donatello gets a call from April. She tells him she's going to send him something that she found out about Noel, that he needs to see it. And then we cut over to Leonardo. He starts giving everyone their orders. He tells Donatello and Michelangelo to take Cuddly to Burno Island, and to meet up with Regenta, aka Siri, and the Nova Posse. He then tells Jenica to stay in Mutant Town, that there's still people there that need help. He then looks over at Raphael, Old Hob, and Cherube, and says that he'll join them, and that they will take care of Madame Noel. Shredder begins to walk away, and Leonardo asks where he's going. Shredder simply says, "There is something else that needs my attention. I've taught you all that I can, but we'll meet again soon," and we cut away. We then see in the final page of the book the rubble from the explosion. We see that the weasels are trapped under some debris. Alopex, who appears to have been in the area, sees them and digs them out. She tells them she's gonna fix them up and restore their strength, and that they'll be a part of her clan now. And that's where this book ends. We next jump into the Alliance number 6. We see Karai briefing April, Casey, Sergeant Winter, and Detective Lewis. Karai tells them that her sources have confirmed April's findings, that the imposter turtles were created by Madame Noel, that they're being used to mold public sentiment towards approval of Baxter Stockman's actions. But then she tells the group that the imposter turtles are their opening, that through them they can deal the finishing blow to Stockman and Madame Noel's plans, and as a bonus, advance their efforts against the Rat King. Here we see Sergeant Winter talk about how Baxter Stockman is seemingly always 5 steps ahead, and so he asks Karai what's the backup plan. Detective Lewis says she's noticed a blind spot that Baxter has, that once he's decided who a person is, that there's nothing that can change his mind. Karai agrees, and says that this will be his undoing. April then says that they need to get him to admit his connection to Madame Noel, that forcing that relationship into the light should be enough to disrupt their plans. Karai then says it would be better to kill him, but Detective Lewis says no murders. Karai then begins to lay out the plan. She tells April that Madame Noel wants April's head on a pike, so that she, Karai, will contact her person inside Madame Noel's organization and tell them about April's location, that Madame Noel will not be able to resist going after April, that she'll probably send out the imposter turtles, but that Karai will have the Foot Clan in place at the said location, and they'll take out the copycat turtles. Detective Lewis then asks how she, Casey Jones, and Sergeant Winters can help, and how does Baxter Stockman fit into this plan. Karai says that Casey Jones and Winters will make sure that the imposter turtles can't escape, and that all Detective Lewis needs to do is her regular job as a detective, that she, Karai, will speak to Baxter Stockman herself. And so the plan goes into action. We jump over to Madame Noel's mutants, Krissa and Zodi. We see that Krissa gets a text message from Karai with the location of April. Zodi asks what the text message says. Krissa tries to hide it from Zodi, but Zodi takes the phone away and sees what it is. She immediately takes the information to Madame Noel. Shortly after, we see that the fake turtles are sent out to April's location, which is an alleyway. At first it all seems quiet, then one of the fake turtles puts on some night vision goggles and sees a figure standing at the end of the alley. We see that it's Rocksteady, which if you remember works for Karai. Rocksteady does his sonic clap technique, and this knocks the fake turtles to the ground. Bebop is suddenly there as well, and we see that up above the alley is Sergeant Winter, and he has his gun pointed down at the fake turtles. The fake turtles realize it's an ambush and begin to run away. Sergeant Winter shoots down at them, and then the fake turtles see that there's more people there that they have to face. Casey Jones, Alopex, Angel, who are now all standing in front of them. A fight breaks out, but the fake turtles realize they'll soon be outnumbered when Bebop and Rocksteady catch up, so the fake turtles throw down a smoke bomb and head up to the rooftops. They figure they'll have a better fighting chance up there, but as soon as they get up there, one of Karai's mutants, Koya, is there waiting for them. She swats them down and they fall back down to the alley. Everyone then surrounds them. The fight is over. The fake turtles are caught. The fake turtles try to bribe their way out, but Karai isn't having it. She tells them she wants to finish the fight that they began at the beginning of the story a few issues back, if you remember. She says if they win, they can leave. One of the fake turtles asks what happens if they lose. This is when Karai tells them to use their imagination, as she kicks one of them in the face. The fight begins, sort of. At first it looks like Karai is getting beat up, but we find out that she's actually studying the fake turtles, trying to get a closer look at their equipment that allows them to look like the regular Ninja Turtles. Then she tells her group that she found it, and then she turns the fight around and breaks the equipment that they use, we see them turn back into human. Sergeant Winter asks if they were using a hologram, but Karai tells him it's a genetic disguise and that they have now been exposed. Also, while all this was going on, we see that April was nearby, recording the whole situation, and she says the name drops of Madame Knoll and Baxter Stockman throughout this whole encounter were super clear, and that now Baxter will have some explaining to do to the press. Casey then calls Detective Lewis and tells her that they've captured the turtle imposters and that she can come arrest them now. Detective Lewis asks about Karai, and Casey tells her she's gone, that she had to get ready for a meeting. We then cut over to Baxter Stockman and Madame Knoll, and they're waiting for a meetup with Karai. Madame Knoll says she thinks this is a mistake, that it seems risky. Baxter tells her not to worry, that he chose to have the meeting in one of his old workstations for a reason, because there he has all the advantages he could want. Karai arrives to the meeting. At first she shows them that she's already dealt with the fake turtles, and that she knows they're Baxter's men. Baxter asks her if she would like to take their place as his hired guns, pretty much offering to hire the Foot Clan, that their services will be invaluable in the coming weeks. He continues to try and persuade her, telling her that they'll have real power when this is all said and done, that they can wipe all the mutants and their slum off the map, and that he can even help remove Karai's scar from her face. This causes Karai to snap as she slaps him to the ground. Baxter tells her that he gave her a chance, that the meeting has concluded, and then he initiates his security protocol, and we see a swarm of flyborgs come down from the ceiling. Madame Knoll gets excited, saying that it looks like they'll be getting a show. Karai tells her that she won't be getting the show she expects, and then we see a bunch of foot soldiers come out of the shadows. Baxter's taken back. How could this be? The place is a secured facility. Either way, it doesn't matter. Karai has found a way. The Foot Clan starts taking down the flyborgs. A few of them try to go after Madame Knoll, but she kills them by taking their life force. She then turns around to tell Baxter Stockman that it's funny how the pawns always think they can take out the queen. But when she turns around to look at Baxter, she sees that he is escaping from the situation using a couple of his flyborgs. You can see him telling her that he's not as durable as her and that she should call her mutant underlings to help her escape. We see Madame Knoll call Zodi, but then we cut over to outside the building. We see that Baxter Stockman has made it out. He's looking for his getaway driver, and then he sees the car, but we see that Karai has used her ninja skills and is already there. She steps out of the getaway car. She assures Baxter that she didn't kill the driver, but that Baxter needs to understand that if she wants to harm Baxter, there's nothing he can do about it, and that that's important for their future relationship. Baxter asks her to explain. She tells him that his imposter turtles were a personal insult and that they have been dealt with. She also explains how the imposter turtles named themselves as Baxter's personal pawns in a video that is currently being spread throughout the public. She also says that this public relations annoyance is a small price to pay, but not the only price. And then she shows him how when he was talking about wiping the mutants and their slum off the map, that she recorded it. So yeah, she can pretty much ruin him. It appears Karai is going to leverage this to call in favors from Baxter moving forward. Seems like she's really thinking far ahead now into the future, now that she's in charge of the Foot Clan. She's probably thinking she'll be able to utilize Baxter's talent somehow. Baxter begins to think. She's got him cornered. He understands that Karai needs a powerful man in her pocket, but he then tells her dangerous days are ahead. Will she even survive long enough to call in her favor? Karai tells him that they'll find out together, but that in the meantime, his life is in her hands, to think about what that's worth to him. Then she ninja vanishes, and that's where this book ends. Issue 7 starts us off inside of a prison cell at Burno Island. We see two of Krang's old helpers that we haven't seen in a while, the Stone Soldiers, Captain Trag and Sergeant Granitor. They hear explosions up above from everything that's going on with the Nova Posse. The two start talking about how maybe the two of them are not the only ones pushing back on Chirell's anti-Krang agenda. So yeah, it looks like these two didn't like how Chirell mutinied. Then you hear Krang's voice as he tells them, so instead you lie here doing nothing? The Stone Soldiers are surprised to see him. They thought he was dead. Krang tells them the sounds that they're hearing up above isn't just pushback against Chirell, but also the diversion that they need, and he hands the two of them weapons. We cut over to New York City, and we see Madame Knoll in her limousine with her mutant lackeys Krissa and Zodi. Madame Knoll is not liking how this Armageddon game is panning out. She is unpleased with the stupidity and cowardice of her teammates, and that it's time to walk away and go back to Dimension Z. That the fallout here is only going to get worse now that she's been exposed. Suddenly the limousine is hit by a blast, and they flip over. Knoll and her mutants begin to crawl out of the limo and see who blasted them. It was Cherube, and she's with Leonardo, Raphael, Raphael, and Old Hob. The story then jumps over to City Hall, and we see Baxter Stockman is pulling up. As soon as Baxter Stockman gets out of his car, he tells Colonel Knight and Sergeant Winters that he will no longer require their services. He then tells them to pack up their things and vacate the premises immediately. Knight tries to talk with him, but Baxter cuts him off and says goodbye. Knight turns to Winters and tells him that they have some serious intel to catch up on, pretty much to discuss what just happened and why. We next bounce over to Bruno Island, and we see Donatello and Michelangelo are with the Nova Posse now. They're also with Cuddly and one of the good Utroms, Mariel. Donatello is being told that both Krang and Chirel have been killed. Siri tells Donnie that she's the one who killed Chirel, and then Commander Ozul informs Donnie that Cleve, one of the Utrom lieutenants that we spoke of earlier, who is now locked up, told them that Krang was killed by Chirel before they got to the island, which if you remember, that's what everybody thought, before Krang's metalhead robot suit brought him back to life. Then suddenly Mariel gets a message from her team that someone is attempting to hack into the Technodrome's firing systems. We then cut over to Krang and the two stone soldiers, Trag and Granitor. We see that they are in the control station. They're scrambling to find the code to unlock the firing commands. Back outside, Commander Ozul mentions that they could probably use Cuddly's help on this. She tells Siri to stay and protect Mariel, and then we see Commander Ozul, the Nova Posse, along with Michelangelo and Donatello, rush to the Technodrome. We next cut over back to Manhattan, and we're back at the scene where Cherubé, Leonardo, Raphael, and Old Hob have flipped over Madame Noel's limousine. Cherubé tells Madame Noel that she's finished, just like her cousin Noitaidar, the one they fought back on Dimension Z. She also tells her that the four winds have been freed, and that they have returned to the Eden worlds, that balance will soon be restored. Meanwhile, Old Hob tells Raphael that he isn't here to listen to a bunch of boring speeches. Raphael agrees, and the two charge at Madame Noel. Madame Noel's mutants, Zodi and Krissa, come to her defense, knocking Raphael and Old Hob back. Cherubé and Leonardo are annoyed by Raphael and Old Hob's impulsiveness, but realize that they must help. Leo charges, and he and Zodi start going at it. Raphael jumps in to help him, and stabs Zodi's tail with his sai. Zodi screams, but then tells him, "Yours hurts, but mine kills," talking about the tip of his tail, which has poison. Leonardo says, "Not anymore it doesn't," and slices off Zodi's tail. The fight is over. Krissa tries to run over to help Zodi, but Old Hob points his guns at her, stopping her in her tracks. Meanwhile, Cherubé and Madame Noel are going at it. Madame Noel manages to shoot Cherubé in the arm. Cherubé, using her powers, blasts the gun out of Madame Noel's hand. Then she lifts Madame Noel up and slams her up against the wall, although this proves to be a mistake. Madame Noel calls her a fool and grabs Cherubé's throat. And we see a little bit of Madame Noel's powers here. She begins to draw the life force from Cherubé. Things start looking rough for Cherubé, but then Old Hob shoots Madame Noel in the back. Noel gets up and reminds Old Hob that bullets cannot kill her, and she starts making her way towards Cherubé. Something unexpected happens at this moment though. Krissa, Madame Noel's snake mutant, says no more and wraps Madame Noel, squeezing her. She tells her sorry, but that this all has to stop. Raphael asks Leonardo if she's killing her. Leonardo says we should stop this, but Cherubé says no, that Madame Noel should die. Krissa tells them that she's not killing her, just putting her to sleep, that she can't let her hurt anybody else. Zodi, the other mutant, asks Carissa what she's doing. Carissa says taking initiative, thinking for herself, that they don't have to be Madame Noel's slaves anymore. She reaches out her hand to Zodi and says they are free. Back inside the Technodrome, Krang and the Stone Soldiers, Trag and Granitor, are still trying to get into the Technodrome firing systems, and they do get into it. When this happens, Krang's metalhead suit asks him how should they proceed. Krang says he's had a change of heart, that Earth becoming the new Ultramanon is no longer the plan, that instead he's gonna burn the planet to cinders, and that they'll have to find another planet to terraform. We see his finger hover over the firing button, and just as he's about to press it, the wall behind them explodes. Donatello, Michelangelo, and the Nova Posse have made it in. Commander Ozul says long time no see, Krang. Krang yells kill them and starts firing. Everybody gets behind cover. Michelangelo asks Donatello if he knew Krang had the Metalhead suit, since Metalhead used to belong to Donatello. Donatello tells him that he didn't even know Krang was alive. Commander Ozul orders her Nova Posse to take down Krang and the Rock Soldiers. We see them charge. Donatello then tells Michelangelo to focus on the Stone Soldiers, that he, Donatello, will go after Metalhead's new pink belly button, referring to Krang. But Donatello says he needs to make a quick call first. first. Crain and his rock soldiers are outnumbered, and Crain knows this. He orders the metalhead suit to activate the teleporter and to set the technodrome for complete global annihilation. The suit gets to work but tells Crain, warning, teleporter activated. Crain says, what do you mean warning? That's exactly what he told him he wanted. The suit responds to him that the teleporter has been activated by an external source, that someone's coming through it. Crain is confused, but then he hears a familiar voice tell him that he's been found guilty of war crimes across multiple dimensions. We see that it's the neutrinos alongside the Fugitoid, and Harold and Libby are also with them. For those who may not know, these are friends of the Turtles who have had adventures and stories together before the Armageddon game began, and the neutrinos were the ones that had Crain on trial for all his war crimes, and it was during that trial that Leatherhead ate him, which is why Leatherhead was the host of Crain at the beginning of this Armageddon game story. Anyways, they blast Crain through the head, and the metalhead suit falls to its knees. The suit can be heard running an analysis, which finds that the parasite, Crain, has been killed. Then you hear Donatello say not just the parasite, as he stabs the metalhead suit through the back, killing it. Donatello says sorry, and just like that, the fight is over. Michelangelo asks them how did they know to come. King Zenter of the Neutrinos tells him that Donatello contacted Marielle and requested her to reach out to the Neutrinos, which was a good call. There's a sense of relief amongst the group, but Donatello says they still have plenty of cleaning up to do. We next cut over to the thin places. You may remember, this is where Kitsune is still recovering. We see that Shredder is now there. He says, I'm here, Kitsune, and he places a scroll on her stomach. He says that he has completed all of the instructions that she left for him. Then he says he needs to know what he must do next. Then surprisingly, she begins to speak. She says, call the sons and daughter of Hamatoyoshi to me now. We are nearing the end game. Then her eyes open up, but they're all white, and we hear her say, my brother grows impatient. And yeah, that's where this issue ends. Alright, next we're jumping into issue 139 of the regular Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles book. We start off in the thin places, so that pocket dimension that we've seen the Shredder use before. And it looks like we're in a field. There is an outline of a flower made by sticks and rocks on the ground. Inside of the flower outline, you can see 5 little sculptures, or figurines. I believe each one of these is supposed to symbolize one of the turtles. We hear a voice say, it's time to end this, come. And we see the Ninja Turtles and the Shredder materialize inside of the flower outline. Leonardo asks Shredder, why did you bring us here? Shredder tells the Turtles that they are hidden from the Rat King in this thin place, and that here they must learn one final skill before they face the Rat King. But that he, the Shredder, won't be the one that teaches it to them. Then suddenly Kitsune appears in front of all of them. Shredder apologizes to the Turtles and tells them that he couldn't tell them because he feared that they would have not agreed with this. This likely has to do with Splinter dying around the time when Kitsune was trying to resurrect her father back around issue 100. They probably in some way blame her for his death. Anyways, Raphael says you're damn right we wouldn't have agreed, but Shredder tells them that they must learn from Kitsune if they're gonna defeat the Rat King. Kitsune then addresses the Turtles. She tells them that she's not asking for a truce, that all they have to do is listen to the knowledge that she has and to learn, that she doesn't need their forgiveness, but that right now, just this once, they're in this together. The Turtles are a bit standoffish, but finally Leonardo says, alright, we're listening, get on with it. Kitsune begins the lesson. She tells the Turtles about the secret 10th cut of Kujikiri called Tongue. She explains it as unification, interconnection, and as a whole. Then she mentions space-time and gravity, the quantum universe. She then tells Donatello that he knows much of this already. She continues her explanation with, everything and everyone has not only spatial, but also psychic gravity, metaphysical gravity of essence. She says that these forces extend beyond the material universe and into thought, dreams, elemental planes, and even the realm of the dead. Donatello chimes in and says this ties into Q&A, right? That he's been learning a lot about that. The rest of the Turtles are surprised that Donatello already knows a lot about this. He tells them that it's a long story, that he'll tell them about it when this is all over. Kitsune answers Donatello and says that it's related to quantum nucleic acid, but that they are not the same, that Q&A is a scientific term for the spirit. She then says ourselves, our memories, which can be influenced by the radiant gravity, and other entities, places, or thoughts. Donatello is blown away by what she's saying. He says the soul, the self, is affected by gravitational forces. Gravity is at the core of everything. Magic is gravity. Kitsune continues with her lesson. She tells the Turtles that surely they have noticed by now how the Hamato family affects everything around it, that the Hamatos have a particular powerful radiant gravity, and it's here that we see a little hologram type thing pop up of the 4 turtle brothers, unlike this space and time plane thing. She then says that their essence pulls people, places, energy, even thoughts into their orbit, whether they wish it or not. You can see Jenica get a little sad when Kitsune explains this. Kitsune keeps going. She says it can be a burden having this nature, since even if you wish to break a particular connection, sometimes it can't be done, that only the strongest gravitational and magical forces can sever them. She then tells them that despite all that, the connection among themselves is not as strong as the ones forged with others. Jenica jumps in here and says, where do I fit into all of this? I am not a Hamato. Kitsune tells her that she, Jenica, is one of many who has been pulled into the Hamato's orbit, and like many others, has been changed forever. Pretty much talking about how she was a human and got turned into a Ninja Turtle. Then she says that she, Jenica, is the strongest example of what she is explaining. That her entire life and physical being were altered to align with the Hamatos. That mystically speaking, gravitationally speaking, Jenica is the same as the Hamatos. And here we see a little Jenica avatar appear next to the 4 turtle brothers in that hologram thing that they're all looking at. Michelangelo chimes in here and says, when do we get to the 10th cut part? And so Kitsune begins to break it down. She says when the turtles are together, their power, their radiant energy increases tenfold, and that the 10th cut will allow them to use all of that power so that they can defeat the Rat King. And they have to do it this way because, as she mentions, the Rat King's gravitational force dwarfs them all. Leonardo gets amped up and tells her, let's begin. The turtles get in a circle around Kitsune. They say the word Tong together, interconnection, unification, as a whole. Kitsune then says, as with ordinary gravity, radiant gravity extends through time, through the past and into the future. Radiant force connects to your past, present, and future. They all exist simultaneously. Here we see the turtles, or almost like their spirits or essences, start to merge into one another. And we see the little 5 sculptures that we saw at the beginning, the ones that represent them, start to glow. Kitsune says, with the power of the 10th cut, they will tap into space-time itself. And we see each one of the turtles seeing visions of things they've gone through in the past, and they also see things that they will go through in the future. The future stuff is probably the most interesting stuff here. We see Leonardo training a group of students. One of the students there is that baboon-looking one, Bob, the one that we keep seeing in the future visions here in this story. We then see Raphael's future vision, which looks kind of like he's gone lone wolf. You see him there alone on a motorcycle. Then we jump over to Michelangelo's future, and he appears to be famous or something in his vision. And then we come to Donatello, and his future looks pretty much like what we've seen in some of the other future visions that he's gone through throughout the story. We see that he's wearing that cloak, and he has that wooden staff that he carries, and he has that magical pencil with the stone in it that he draws with. You can see that it looks like he's been drawing turtles on a bunch of sheets of paper. We also see that he's with 3 other turtles that don't appear to be the regular turtles. Maybe he creates them, we'll see. Kitsune talks about how their past and the anticipation of their future shapes who they are, and that the lives they've all touched have their own pasts and futures as well, and that that's also a part of them. That it's an eternal cycle, and that that's what they'll have to tap into to end the Armageddon game. And we see the moment where it looks like the turtles are splitting apart, going their own way. We jump over to a scene where it's just the turtles by themselves without Kitsune, and the turtles are sitting in a circle in the forest. Michelangelo says that he doesn't want to believe all that stuff is their future, that it seems like they're gonna drift apart. Leonardo says that it's not fated, that they can still decide for themselves. Donatello says that even with a causality loop, that it's still possible to change what happens, that they can at least try. Michelangelo is still unsure though. He says that the Armageddon game feels like their last big hurrah, that it's getting harder and harder to bounce back from all the different things they've gone through, and that all these bad things keep happening to them and the people that they care about. Raphael then chimes in and says maybe we shouldn't hold things together. Everyone is shocked. Raphael snaps a little bit and says maybe if they go their separate ways, it'll spare everyone else all the problems the turtles, keep causing. Raphael gets up and walks away, and we see the little stone statue that appears to symbolize Raphael begin to break and fall apart. We next cut over to the Turtles and they're now back with Kitsune. She asks them if they're ready, that the Rat King awaits them, and just as she says this, we hear a voice say, "Ah, here's where you've been hiding, sister," and we see the Rat King's face form in the sky. It's super creepy. He continues by saying, "Very sneaky of you. Even with your little martial arts lesson, I want you all to know that you still don't stand a chance. You never did." And yeah, that's where this book ends. Alright, so we've come to the Armageddon Game issue 8, the last book in this Armageddon Game story. And it picks up in the thin places, and it looks like the place where Kitsune was recovering earlier in the story. We see that the whole Pantheon family is there, minus Kitsune and the Rat King. They're all talking about how this is a bad sign, that something is going down. They bicker for a little bit, but one of the siblings, Gothano, says that they need a plan of action. One of the other siblings, the Toad Baron, says, but what about the rules of the Pantheon not being able to directly participate in the game? He also mentions that Kitsune's pawns in this game, the Turtles and their allies, have managed magnificently so far. Gothano tells his siblings that the Rat King will likely not stop, even though his trio of terror, Baxter, Madame Knoll, and Krang, have failed. That the Rat King will not stop, even if it means destroying the world. And that it appears Kitsune knew this as well, and that she already seems to have made her decision in getting involved, and that they should too. We jump over back to the Turtles, Kitsune, and the Shredder, and we see that they're all looking at a giant version of the Rat King in the sky, like we saw in the previous book. He has found them, and he begins to speak to them. He tells them that the Armageddon game has always been his to win. Then he says, let's get on with finishing it. We next jump over to New York City Hall. We see that Baxter Stockman is having a meeting with April and Sally. You can see that Detective Lewis and Sergeant Winter are there too, watching. We jump in mid-conversation, as we hear Baxter say, "What are you implying?" April cuts him off and tells him that she's not implying anything, that Baxter's lying and corruption is finished. She tells him that Krang is now dead, Madame Knoll is now placed in stasis custody, the Gang of Four, so the imposter turtles, are on their way to Guantanamo Bay, and that Karai has enough dirt on him, Baxter, to bury his reputation. Baxter then asks them, why are they having this meeting? And you see Sally explain that it's to deliver a to-do list for Baxter. First, she wants Baxter to make Mutant Town an official new borough of New York, and that to appoint her as interim borough president until they have an election. She then tells him that she wants Detective Lewis to be in charge of a joint mutant and human task force, which will recruit and teach a new Mutant Town police department, with the help of Sergeant Winter. And lastly, she tells him that he, Baxter, will join Regenta, aka Siri, and her, Sally, on a national press tour to promote the positive mutant-human relationship to the masses. Baxter begins to think about it. He tells them that yes, they do have him at a disadvantage, but that he was just a player in the game, that the real Grandmaster, the Rat King, is still playing, and that the game is far from over. We jump back over to the Thin Places, and we see that the final fight is about to begin, with the Rat King versus the Turtles, Shredder, and Kitsune. The Rat King is no longer in the sky how we saw him previously, and is now actually with them, and he's huge like a big kaiju monster. The Rat King comments about how it's ironic that the fight for their world is taking place in his, the Thin Places. Everyone gets ready, and you can see that their eyes start to glow. They all attack the Rat King at once. Kitsune is the first to get to him. She turns into her fox form and attacks the Rat King, but the Rat King grabs her by the neck and throws her to the ground. While this happens, the turtles climb up the back of the legs of the Rat King and slice the back of his legs behind his knees, and this brings the Rat King to his knees. When this happens, Michelangelo and Shredder leap up into the air and give the Rat King a good couple strikes to the face, causing him to fall to the ground and start bleeding from the nose. Laying on his back, the Rat King begins to laugh, and it appears he begins to levitate and gets upright again. He says finally, some real fun, and strikes down at the ground, causing everyone to go flying back. The turtles regroup, and then begin a second attack. We cut back over to Mutant Town, and we see that the Nova Posse, the Neutrinos, Cuddly, Casey Jones, April, Angel, and Karai are all in Mutant Town, and the town is in ruins after all the chaos that's been going on. You see that April, Casey, Angel, and Karai are discussing how this is a mess to clean up now. The Neutrino King hears this and says, speaking of messes, the neutrinos intervening here on Earth has broken a treaty that now has caused the planet Airwill to declare war on them. This is a big fear that, if you remember, was brought up at the beginning of the story. Then he says that Fugitoid, Harold, and Libby will stay back on Earth to help upgrade their technologies, but that he and the neutrinos must return home and prepare for war. Commander Ozul of the Nova Posse tells him that the Nova Posse will go back with him, that there's no way they're gonna let Mazul, the guy who's declaring this war, to become the next Krang. Next, they ask Cherube if she will be returning to Dimension Z. She says yes, as soon as Cuddly is rested up, and we see that Cuddly is knocked out sleeping. And so the Nova Posse and the neutrinos board their ship and blast off, as Casey, April, Karai, and Angel look on. We hear Angel say, "I wonder where Shredder took the turtles." We jump back over to the final fight. Everyone is trying to attack the giant Rat King, but are getting swatted away from him pretty easily. The Rat King begins to talk about how it feels good to actually be in the fight again, and then he says he would like to acknowledge who inspired him to break the rules and interfere with the game directly. And then we see him pick up Kitsune, who is still in her fox form. He tells her, "You brought me back into the game full force." But then you hear a voice say, "No, just you, Rat King," and we see that the rest of the Pantheon have now arrived, and they're there to help stop the Rat King. They know if he wins the game, it'll be pure chaos. The story then takes us back over to Cherube and Cuddly. It looks like they're getting ready to leave, but then suddenly something starts happening to Cherube. Her eyes begin to glow, and she begins to look at the turnstone, and then she begins to hear voices. The voices say, "Cherube, hear us," and you see that it's her brethren, the Four Winds, the ones Leonardo and Shredder helped save earlier in the story. They say that they have returned home to the Eden Worlds, and that the balance has been restored. Cherube snaps out of it, and Cuddly asks if she's okay. Cherube says yes, but that something tells her that they shouldn't leave just yet. Back at the final fight, the Pantheon tell the Rat King that now they're all here. The Rat King responds and says, just in time, that it turns out that the other players are a bit more fragile than he anticipated, and we see the Turtles and the Shredder are bruised and battered. Then he says, including our sister, and you see him lift up Kitsune. He proceeds to backhand her, sending her flying, and says the show, or the game, must go on. We see that when she lands, she turns back into her regular form. Rat King steps over her and says, "Stay, I'll be back for you." One of the Pantheon siblings, Jaguar, yells "bastard" as she leaps forward towards the Rat King with her sword in hand. The Rat King quickly grabs a sharp broken tree branch and blocks her sword with it. Then suddenly, he stabs his sister Jaguar through the chest with it, killing her. She seems to combust into flames and disappear after she is killed. Then their brother Manmith yells Jaguar's name and begins to swing his axe towards the Rat King. The Rat King dodges his blows and tells him that he, of all people, should appreciate killing so as not to be killed. Manmith tells him that to survive is one thing, senseless death is another. But right when he says this, Rat King strikes Manmith with Jaguar's sword, killing him. Manmith then also suddenly combusts and is gone. Gathano then jumps in. He begins to choke the Rat King with one of his tentacles, telling the Rat King telepathically to cease this madness. But using the fire from the combustion of Manmith's death, Rat King lights Jaguar's sword and burns Gathano with it. Gathano yells it burns as he begins to catch fire, and the Rat King says yes it does, and that's the purpose of all this. To burn this world to the ground, everyone and everything in it. An apocalyptic reset, like Gathano tried to do in the past, but with an actual follow-through. He says that the Pantheon were made to be the planet's apex predator, and that he, the Rat King, intends to make that happen. It then cuts over to Toad Baron and Aka. Toad Baron asks Aka what they should do. Aka doesn't have an answer. The Turtles are watching everything go down, and Raphael comments on why the Pantheon just didn't dogpile on the Rat King when they had him outnumbered. Donatello tells him because they're playing the wrong game, following modern conventional rules, and that the Rat King is playing an ancient game, unconventional and supernatural. Then Donatello kneels down next to Kitsune. He says Kitsune brought them there for a reason, and it wasn't to practice martial arts. During this part, you see Shredder pleading with Kitsune to wake up. Donatello continues. He says that the only way to defeat Rat King is to fight fire with fire, and that Kitsune has given them the fire they need. Leonardo looks at him and says, "The 10th cut." Donatello agrees. The Rat King, with his attention towards Toad Baron and Aka, doesn't see the Turtles, and they start preparing to perform the 10th cut. You see the energy building around them. Finally, this catches the Rat King's attention. At the same time, we see Kitsune say the word beloved to the Shredder. While this is all going on back with Cherube, we see that something starts happening to Cherube. She's being pulled to the Turtles. She suddenly appears standing in the middle of all of them, and Kitsune gets up and yells Cherube, the Turnstone, use it quickly and stop the Rat King before it's too late, but the Rat King says it already is, and we see a swarm of rats come out of nowhere and begin to overwhelm the heroes. Cherube drops the Turnstone, and it falls next to Kitsune. Now if you remember, Cherube said earlier in the story that only she, Cherube, is able to wield the Turnstone, that anybody else that tries will die. But yeah, Kitsune picks it up. Shredder asks her what is she doing, that this will destroy her. Kitsune tells Shredder that she's redeeming herself. She lifts the Turnstone into the air, and we see that she immediately begins to vaporize. You can see her screaming. She yells Chi-Yu would like a word with all of us. Just a quick reminder, Chi-Yu was the eldest brother of the Pantheon family that went missing a long time ago. Anyways, we suddenly see Chi-Yu is released from a prison that is 4.2 light years away from Earth. But as soon as he's released, like a bolt of energy, he crosses space and makes it to where the final fight is happening with everyone. And he looks pissed. He yells out, "My Pantheon family, hear me now. Game over." Eika says checkmate. And we see Toad Baron gulp, and the Rat King says, "Gulp indeed." And then suddenly Chi-Yu creates a massive explosion that looks like an atom bomb. After the battle, we hear a voiceover. It's Raphael, and he's talking to Old Hob. You can tell some time has passed since the final fight. Raphael says that 1 second they were all getting eaten alive by a bunch of rats, and that the next moment they were back in Mutant Town. No more rats, no more Pantheon. He says that Cherube said that Kitsune probably used the Turnstone to teleport the turtles out of there before the bad thing that happened to the Pantheon happened to them. Old Hob asks Raphael if he really thinks the Pantheon is dead. Raphael says he doesn't know, but it seems like they're out of the picture for now. Old Hob asks how Shredder's doing after the loss of Kitsune. Raphael tells him that Kitsune left behind an old ninja scroll, but that Shredder gave it to Karai, but that Karai was pretty cold about it. You see the exchange here and how it went down. And Shredder tells Karai, "I give it to you now." Karai responds to him that it isn't his to give, that it belongs to the Foot Clan, and that she's the Foot Clan now. Raphael then says that both Shredder and Karai took off after that Shredder went back with Cherube to Dimension Z for a fresh start somewhere far away, and that Karai took a bunch of her top soldiers into a soul-searching trip inside the thin places, that Koya, Bludgeon, and Venus stayed back, but Carissa, Zodi, so Madame Null's 2 mutants, and Casey and one of the Punk Frogs went with Karai. Raphael then thanks Old Hob for helping him bring down the wall earlier in the Armageddon game, that it was a big help, and that he wished Man Ray and the Weasels didn't have to die. Old Hob says, "Me too." Old Hob then tells Raphael that at least he, Old Hob, has Mutant Island now, that even though Mutant Town is free, that there's still going to be a lot of mutants that won't want to integrate, and so that he'll be happy to take them all in. The two shake hands, and Hob asks Raphael if he wants to ride back home. Raphael says no thanks, and you can see that he looks kinda sad. You can see that he's thinking about Alopex. Their relationship has gone through a lot during this whole Armageddon game. But yeah, Raphael tells him that he'll just swim home, and we see him jump into the water and swim off. Now we do get an epilogue, and it's back in Burno Island with the Utroms. You can see Marielle and some of the other Utroms are trying to figure out what to do with Krang's body as they take it out of the metalhead suit. They say even though he was bad, he always believed that he was acting in the best interest of their people, that he deserves at least a respectful send-off now that he's dead. One of the Utrom then says, what should they do with the metalhead robot body? Mariel says that Donatello and Harold and Legia didn't want it, so to just get a cleanup crew to take it over to the scrap heap. And we see that they do this, but once they leave, we see the metalhead robot body turn on, and we're left with the message to be continued. So yeah, that's how the Armageddon game ends. What a crazy long story arc. If you watched the whole video, congratulations, you made it to the end. And speaking of ends, after this Armageddon game, the comic started what was called the Road to 150. Now, for those who may not know, the IDW Ninja Turtles comics have been going on since 2011. And as you saw there in the Armageddon game story, they have gone well past 100 issues. But around the time the Armageddon game finished, it was announced that the current run of Ninja Turtles comics would end at 150, and that the title would get relaunched after that. So we're gonna get a whole new issue #1, but don't worry, it'll still be the same turtles and continuity of these IDW turtles that were a part of this story. It's pretty much just going to be like a fresh new start for them with a whole new writer, Jason Aaron, that's taking over the title, and new artist. But anyways, yeah, that does leave us with the question, what happened on that road to 150 that happened after the Armageddon game and that finished the original run of these comics? Well, that's something that we'll have to talk about in my next IDW video that we'll be doing. We'll discuss everything that happened after this Armageddon game that led to issue 150. That way you guys know everything you need to know going into the new relaunch with the new issue number 1. So yeah, keep an eye out for that video. But yeah, that does it for this series. Thank you everybody for sitting through all that. I really appreciate it. But I'm going to go ahead and close it out, and we'll see you in a little bit with another one. Take care.